All right, great, we're on. So we've got a short meeting tonight before the advisory hearing. We've just got a few things to cover. I don't know that we need to read the agenda because it's so short, but the first item is calling the meeting to order. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Are there any public comments? All right, so next is consideration of ballot questions for town election, and Diane has provided us with language for the ballot questions concerning bond issues.
My only issue with this, and I was talking to Sharon before the meeting, just asked her, I don't know if they've finalized from advisory or if Sharon's finalized what they're bonding, and this, if they're paying for some of these things with free cash, it wouldn't be a ballot question. So.
There's a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 on the budget committee, and Sean is going to be there, and they're just going to finalize the building capitals. And then we did go through and decide what we wanted to bond, but because Sean was very granular, so now I'm going to roll it and tweak things a little differently, so we'll know what we want to do.
But like on the first one, you had mentioned that the police cruiser was going to be bonded, but are the other police items going to be bonded? The radios, the taser devices, the desktop computer? Okay, so we're going to have,
Free cash.
All right, so should we take those off then?
So
we're going to leave the question, but leave the police cruiser.
Okay, so take everything else.
Okay, what about the second one, Sharon?
Do you want to give her a list?
This says street sweeper equipment to make modifications and to purchase mobile and portable radios for the CM&D department.
That's what he's working on. Yeah.
That one's not final.
Right,
I don't think farm pond should be its own question. That'll never pass being all by itself. Can't we combine that with the related?
I think the microphones are on. Rick, I don't think the microphones are on.
I don't even have one down here.
Hadn't we talked about putting each of the fire engines in a separate article also?
Separate, vehicle separate?
I would think the fire engine should be separate questions.
Yeah, I think you, I
Because they're
think
such
you need
large
to do that.
items.
Although,
You could have some people who want to buy one
Well,
vote for one.
I
and
only
some people
voted
want-
I only voted for one.
Right, but if some people might think the other one's more important, so
Right.
then neither one of them makes it.
It's true.
okay.
Can I suggest we combine question one and the farm pond question together? Police
We-
cruiser and farm pond docks?
And the police vehicle?
Yeah,
why there instead of CM&D?
because it's only one item. For
But it's
one
more-
Right,
police.
but a police cruiser is a lot different. I would feel like that would be kind of a weird thing to combine.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
It's more likely with the facility.
Yeah, I would say,
So move it
put it
together?
with, if you're gonna do a ballot question, I think what we should do is do a police cruiser, two separate ones for the fire trucks, and then do a catch-all for any of the facilities things that we're gonna bond and the farm pond docks. I think that would be one question for a number of items, and then the other ones are separate.
Well, it seems to me the farm pond docks should be free cash. First of all, it's not a large sum of money.
Right.
To do a ballot question for 25,000 seems pretty small.
Sharon said it was because of the life of the docks. They had talked about spreading it over time, and because I think a lot of the facilities are so many small items, they were gonna use a lot of the free cash that was designated for capital to pay for those town buildings, all the small items in the town buildings. So
Do you have
they
to
needed
specify everything that's in the article that needs to be purchased, or can you just say to purchase town,
Generic.
to purchase equipment for wherever?
It has to correspond to the motion.
Yeah, that's what is being worked on now, because Sean's stuff is very granular, and, he's gonna approach it more like a project, 2 or 3 projects, right, David? David, town building projects, 5 of them? Oh, 5? not even put all the little things like heat repairs, there's just so many little things that just, you wanna make it more,
And are we bonding both Pine Hill and the regional capital items? Or are they broken out as, didn't you say some items were,
right now, we have everything as debt, except for the Dell utility box order.
So we're gonna have two separate items then for that, Pine
But
Hill
the,
and,
the question
Yes.
isn't whether it's debt or not, because I would support debt on all of these. The question is, do we raise the tax rate in order to pay for a bond? I have no problem with borrowing money within the tax rate. No problem at all, particularly for a small item like $25,000. But we're asking people to raise the tax levy in the town, and we're already at like $20. So why can't these things be borrowed within the levy limit?
right, because we have a large, that's a good question, because we're well below the levy limit, I think, at where we are right now. So you could borrow, especially like the docks, you can borrow that within the levy limit, so you wouldn't need a question for that.
Yeah, we definitely could, and we did talk about that.
I think the fire trucks were the big issue.
Fire trucks, yeah, you'd want to bond, I think those you'd have to bond outside the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that, but the small little things,
and the street sweeper probably as well, because that's
that's a small piece of equipment.
no, that's $210,000.
Is it?
Piece of equipment, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, if you look
For an
at the-
attachment to a truck?
No, the street sweeper is a separate vehicle. The
261, I
attachment,
think.
Oh, the attachment's just the chipper, got
right,
it. Oh,
the
right,
sweeper's
right, right, you're right.
231.1.
231.
So I think those three are definitely items you'd bond, the fire trucks and the street sweeper.
And then the rest of them we just wouldn't vote on? Because they would all be under the levy limit?
Yeah, I mean, we did that last year with the police vehicles.
We didn't vote on it.
Mary, do you have?
I have a question, I guess it's for Paul, which is, when you borrow within the levy limit, does it not have to be paid off within 1 year?
No,
It does not, okay. I
no,
thought
you
it
can
was-
borrow for 20 years.
Okay.
The only difference is, if you do a debt exclusion, then the repayment is a tax increase
No,
during the
I-
life of the bond.
I understand that difference.
Otherwise, it has to be within the levy limit.
I thought I had read somewhere that it was, had to be paid off within the year that it was borrowed.
So that would say we would just have three items on the ballot. We'd have the
Street
street
sweeper.
sweeper.
Two fire trucks. But what
And each
about
of the fire trucks.
any of the school capital items, would they be bond?
The concrete paving work and some of the things were items we could, and they were trying to only use so much free cash. So that's why they were looking at moving certain items to the bond side versus.
But they're not, this wouldn't be free cash, right? This would just be borrowing under the levy limit.
Yeah, it's just,
Okay, I
yeah.
think in the
So
schools,
there,
they were
so
trying
there's three.
I mean, they are gonna apply free cash to some stuff, but I don't think it's gonna be that
About half a million.
big. But well, we can put things on the ballot and have it be meaningless because the town meeting decides to fund them outside of 2.5 also, right? So we have more flexibility if we put them on the ballot now,
I see.
right? I think.
But I don't want to create the possibility of a tax rate of
Yeah,
$24. Yeah.
$22, yeah.
So right now, all I have is the police cruiser and the two fire trucks. correct?
Well, the street sweeper.
And the street
The
sweeper,
street-
and
the
probably,
street sweeper and the two fire trucks, I have four things, okay.
and there's probably $500,000 in the school projects, the last question at the end.
Let me see,
Right.
the Pine Hill's 161,000, and the region
It's
was,
in the 260 something, that's.
Yeah.
Pine Hill went down, actually Pine Hill's 146.5, or
160, okay.
100.
And then our portion of the region is 221,000.
So that's a little under 400.
Let's close to 500. 221 plus 280?
No, 280 is Dover's share.
Oh,
221
sorry,
is
okay.
Sherburne's share.
Plus
And
146.
then the
Oh, okay.
126 is Pine Hill,
Okay.
so it's like 450.
So, wait, 220 plus 120?
Oh, yeah,
221 plus
sorry,
126?
350.
It's just a
yeah.
little under 350.
Yeah, sorry.
So should that be one of the ones we've got in there too?
I think so, because I think we're gonna be bumping up against the levy limit If
I'd
you
rather
tried
have
to
people
borrow
vote on
these.
the schools
Right,
anyway. I think they ought to
exactly.
vote on the schools.
I think you leave the schools.
So that'd be like question number 5, is that it? Keep them combined together?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're taking out the farm pond one, right?
Take
Yeah.
out the docks. Separate the
You're
fire
separating the
engines.
fire
The 2
engines.
fire trucks, then there's the street sweeper that's by itself,
No,
Yeah.
and the police cruiser by itself.
Each fire truck separately.
Yeah, each
Yeah.
separate,
Yeah,
right.
that's what we said.
Separately.
So
Then
there'll
the
be-
street sweeper by itself, the 2 fire trucks, and then the end will be the way I have it now.
For 5
Right.
questions. It'll be
And
5
don't have the
questions.
police vote at all,
Oh, you
right?
wouldn't have the police cruiser on there?
I don't know. Do we?
It's too small.
$60,000.
What's that?
60.
60.
The school's separated.
Okay.
Because the region requires an intergovernmental agreement for bonding, so that might be something different than if you decide.
Okay.
Separate the 2 schools? Okay.
How have we done that in the past? Have we separated the schools previously? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Last time I looked today, I go back to 2014 before I could find intermunicipal.
Combined one?
Because I think
Yeah.
we've been using free
And they
cash the
were,
last
and they
few
were
years.
separated. I have them on my desk right now, actually.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then not the police cruiser for 60? I mean, we should
Police
be able
cruiser
to,
we can borrow within the levy.
we should be able to
limit,
borrow within the levy limit for, right?
you think?
Yeah, and that's what we did last year.
This is okay.
So
Still too many questions.
that's 1,
I know, but
So it'll
if
be
you-
the
if you're
street
splitting each of
sweeper,
the-
2 fire engines, and 2
Three.
school.
yeah.
So it looks like we're one of these wild
Five.
boards that's spending money left and
Yeah.
right.
Well, if not, then you should have voted against one of the fire trucks like I did, Paul. So,
okay.
Street sweeper, 2 engines,
Yep.
all separate, fine.
yep.
Right.
1, 2.
So it's just
Yeah,
the street
it's
sweeper, though, it's
5.
it's not the modifications
Not
to
the
the truck?
modifications,
No, the 2
or
fire
the
trucks.
radios.
And the 2 schools separated. Okay, I'll make that tomorrow.
So when do we find out about the CM&D piece?
Well, if we're just
Town
gonna put the
buildings?
street sweeper on here, it doesn't really matter so much, right?
Right, because I think the town buildings, they were planning on using free cash for most of his stuff, because it was so many small things, right?
Yes. Yes.
So just do the street sweeper?
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the street sweeper, I'm gonna separate the 2 fire trucks, and I'm gonna separate the 2 schools. That's
I think
fine.
that's it. Does that make sense to you? Paul? Does that make sense to you? That's okay? All right. All right, so Diane, do you want to go, like,
So we're doing
right,
that?
or after,
I think we
after
need
the
to vote
meeting,
on
and
it
then
at
we need
some
to vote
point.
on
I
it?
can go down and do it now.
Yeah, okay, that'd be good. All right.
Actually, Jeff Waldron just walked in from advisory, if you wanna.
Hey, Jeff?
Hey, Jeff? We're talking about the ballot questions. Do you know what was supposed to be, what was, you guys were planning on bonding?
We have a list, we walked through it in detail. Might take me a minute to get up to speed here. I mean, I think Sharon and Heidi can
Okay,
have
so,
been more involved. We had some confusion whether you could bond the regional school or not. And someone said,
yes.
we can. Because I think we'd like to do that. A lot of the town building ones are on maintenance way.
Right.
Mhm.
So they're not as clear
Right.
as, but we were worried that, if we couldn't bond regional school. All theirs are really classified. Pine Hills are pretty much long-term, 2-floor.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So what,
Fire trucks.
right.
In CM&D, we decided we wanted to do the sweeper's $230,000, it's probably a 10-year asset.
So we did, what we're talking about putting on for ballot questions are a ballot question for the street sweeper,
Yeah.
2 ballot questions for each one for each fire engine, and then 1 for each of the schools. 1 for Pine Hill and 1 for the region,
and anything else that gets borrowed would be within the levy
within
limit?
the levy limit.
So town buildings would all be free cash?
Or within the,
Free cash
borrowing
or-
under
or
the levy
within
limit?
the levy limit.
What about police, they're not that huge.
That was within the levy limit as well, we thought.
Well, how much of a levy limit do we have?
I don't know. Ed got here.
We were like 800,000 below the levy limit.
Okay, so that would work.
Yeah.
That would work.
The schools are only 221, regional school, Pine Hill's 126.
It still raises our taxes if we borrow.
Right,
under
it's
the
still,
levy
I mean,
limit,
whether
but-
you go up to the levy limit or not, it's,
We don't have a choice about that, that's pretty hard. So,
what's up, Mary?
If you borrow within, you're not gonna get the same excess capacity that you're getting otherwise. The
All right.
700 goes down.
Understood, but otherwise, we're going 2.5, so we're going up either way.
Yeah, but it's not a free.
Right.
Now, when you guys vote, or when you implement, some of these we think should be 20-year bonds, not 10-year bonds, particularly fire engine.
That's not on here.
Yeah, I know that, but
That's
sure,
a
keep
separate
in
vote.
mind.
This is
It
just a vote
affects-
on to whether we-
It affects the debt expense, so,
Right, of course.
and it also then philosophically spread the cost over multiple people who benefit 20 years from now. So
Right,
I think it's worth,
Hello?
right.
particularly the fire engine.
Hello?
Well, I guess
Yes.
we'll have to review it again after she gets back.
Okay.
20 years.
Mr. Hook,
I was just curious if the fire engine's life is 10 years. Would you want to,
if it's what?
If the life of a fire engine is 10 years, would you really want to? put
It's
the-
30 years.
Is it 30 years?
20 to 30 years, yeah.
Yeah.
For which?
Fire trucks.
All right, in that case, I'm good with it.
Current ones are 32 years old, ones are between 32
Yeah.
and 28, and it takes about 18 months to replace them, so engine 2 will be, I think, 34 years old when it gets replaced.
Okay. That's good. Thanks, Jeff. That's good.
Yes, sir.
Now we have an appointment to make, this is just to clarify that Fire Chief Kinney is also, by virtue of being Fire Chief, he's our Emergency Management Director, Forest Warden, and Right to Know Coordinator, so we want to formally confirm that. So do we have a motion
So
on that?
moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, so we can reflect that, David, as
Could I have
a
a
formal vote.
follow-up motion?
Yes, please.
That the board send a letter to Eversource and Comcast and Verizon, notifying them of this appointment.
Okay,
Because in
good.
my discussions with them, they weren't sure. They
Okay.
had stuff going back many years.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye, good. All right, David, can you draft up that letter? All right, good. Routine business, town administrator.
I have nothing.
Okay. All right, consideration of a payroll warrant. Do we have that
Yeah, it was
warrant?
in our packet.
Here we go, it's right here.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Do we have a second on that? Second, moved and seconded, all in favor? Okay, great. There you go. Selectmen items.
Should I sign this as Chuck or as?
Both of them. Paul, any selectmen items, or George, anybody?
But just, no.
No, okay. Anything? Okay, no selectmen items. Meeting calendar, we just set a meeting for April 19th at 7 o'clock. We have some minutes to go through. Did anybody get a chance to look at those minutes?
I did.
Okay,
There's one problem with one of the minutes and the other two are fine.
okay. Do you remember which one is fine? We can vote that and then deal with the problem one?
The problem one is pretty simple to fix. It's-
Okay,
At the end of minutes, there's supposed to be a signature of somebody who prepared the minutes and
Okay.
the list of documents that occurred at the meeting. And the first of the, one of the minutes doesn't have it.
okay.
January 16th.
Yeah, it's, I thought it was February 22nd. Oh, no, that's, got it. Yeah, so it must have been the January
January
one.
16th, yeah, January
All right.
16th.
All right, so with that amendment, Diane, can you make that revision on the 16th, please? Oh, Diane's not here. David? Okay. All right, so we have a motion to approve these minutes?
As amended, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All in favor to approve January 16th, February 8th, February 22nd. And David, as we discussed the other day, it would be good if we could figure out a way to put these on the website so they're actually more easily found by date. For some reason, they're coming up, if you search, they come up, all the Februarys come up together, no matter what year they are, and then all the Marches come up, no matter what year they are. They should be in some kind of date order, if possible. Okay. Next in line. Okay, so we're recessed until 7 o'clock, or whenever the advisory committee starts, okay?
Sounds good.
Great. So Rick, we can go into recess? Okay.
If you don't watch that, we might miss
All righty, guys, we're going to continue the public hearing for Sherburne Advisory Committee for the 2018 annual town meeting warrant. And specifically, we are going to continue on here with articles. I believe we started 18 this evening. Let me double check that. Yeah, we're going to start with Article 18. As a quick reminder to those petitioners who are presenting articles, you have, I believe it's 5 minutes to give a presentation, if you so choose to make a presentation. Any other discussions, we limit to 2 minutes per piece. I'll remind you that if you're going to say something that's already been said, no need. And if you would like to make a secondary comment, I would ask that you wait until everyone else has gone ahead of you. Okay? And with that being said, Susan, do you mind taking time on that? Okay. We're going to be kind of diligent. We're going to be darn diligent about the time on these things. Okay. So as far as Article 18 goes, let's get rolling. Mr. Higley from the Planning Board.
Thank you very much, and I very much appreciate you continuing your hearing so that the Planning Board could hold our hearing, and we went to 2 nights doing it, so it was very, very productive. So I thank you all very much. So Article 18 is accessory apartment, and this is where we already have a existing bylaw that allows family members and or housekeeper to live there and not charge rent. So this amendment, Article 18, is to amend Section 3.2 of the zoning bylaw to enable someone other than a family member or housekeeper, and to enable the charging of rent. The purpose is to allow a property owner to stay in town if they're having financial stress. Then this provides some additional income, and it allows some diversity that's recommended in the housing production plan. We added a feature. Says in number 8, such unit may not be rented to any single party for a period of less than 30 days. That's to provide some control on it being having different occupants come and go. We also increased the square footage from 800 to 1,200 square feet, and that's because in some cases the family member, the property owner may want to downsize, and this allows them to stay in town, to live in the smaller property and rent out the main unit. It just allows that, makes that an easier potential. So it has a lot of advantages in keeping allowing folks to stay in town. In the primary expectation is it'll, if someone takes up on this, they'll be able to stay and enjoy the extra income from the accessory apartment. And so the Planning Board recommends this, as you see in the warrant article.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, we're going to open up for public comment.
Just, John, to make things easier for everybody to follow, I have in front of me something that's amended from the warrant article. So are you recommending what's in the warrant, or are you recommending
I think this one is in the warrant.
something that's amended? Because I have all these cross-outs.
That's how the warrant reads, Paul.
That's how the,
For just for 18.
so all these cross-outs in this, I got a handout from somebody.
Right. So
Yeah, it shows the edits.
All the changes here are the same changes that are in the warrant? There's no changes from the planning board on
Article 18, that's correct. We used strike-throughs to show the changes between the existing, current zoning bylaw and the amendments. So there's strikeouts in, I believe there's no other changes. We did make, on other articles, we did make changes to the article as it appears in the warrant. But actually, I need a copy. I need to turn my page.
The changes that are
change from.
Microphone, please. Microphone.
Marion, can you use the microphone,
Ma'am,
please?
Thank you.
Let me just get to Article 18.
Where do you see
The
that?
original warrant had changes to the original bylaw. But since then, from our hearings, we have additional amendments. And those, I believe, from my copy, are in italics. So the crossouts in italics are amendments made within the last few days since our hearings.
Mary, Article 18 says there are no changes in that
In Article
regard.
18, there are none, but in subsequent
I think that was Paul's
articles,
question with
you'll
18.
see that difference. Right.
Okay.
So just to clarify, 18, no changes since the warrant?
Correct.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there any other public comments?
I have a question, just on a couple of points. There's a restriction here that says the unit shall be occupied by not more than 3 persons. What's the thinking on that? John, is this, you've got a 1,200 square foot
Right.
use. You could have a family, you could have, a collection of
Right.
cousins, you could have whatever you want. I mean,
Right.
there are limitations on how you define a family and prohibiting families from living together, and I'm just wondering why the town cares how many people live in the accessory unit.
We talked about changing the square footage, specifying the number of bedrooms, things like that, just to put a control on it so it's not a duplex. So that we inserted that as a control measure so that it's an accessory apartment for the property owner. So it's a limit.
So you got a couple with a 2-year-old, and they have another baby, they get thrown out of their accessory apartment?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is our current rules say you have to be a family member or a housekeeper, so we've relaxed it, but we haven't, it still has limitations.
Yeah, I think, we've got a housing plan, though, that says we're trying to encourage various kinds of housing. I think this would be a great way to encourage various kinds of housing if it were actually open to people who may, need to live in an apartment with 1,200 square feet. And then my other question was, and this comes from my time on the zoning board, and we've had this in the bylaw for a while, it shall be issued for a period of no more than 2 years, but maybe renewable. Just speaking from the perspective of having gone through a lot of those hearings, it's kind of a burden both on the zoning board and on the applicant to have it renewable every 2 years. I'm not sure why 2 years was picked originally, but it seems unnecessarily short to have somebody have to pay an application fee every 2 years and come in and have a hearing. There are enforcement provisions if somebody's not complying with the special permit. I would recommend that this be for a longer period, like 5 years or something.
One thing we did change was that, so that if the property changes hands, you don't have to get a new permit. You go in a 2-year period. So that's
good, yeah.
some relaxation. The language said if you don't renew the permit, then you actually have to remove the facilities that make it a functional separate unit, like the plumbing and kitchen sink and things like that. So this language allows that property to stay as it is. If you don't want to renew the permit, you can renew the permit and not have to remove anything or restore it to its previous condition. That's an advantage in this version. I can say that the planning board did not consider making the special permit time longer. But
Just because
if
some.
that's okay.
Is that
Yep,
okay?
go ahead.
Because I'm hearing and I'm also reading, and I know John's thinking on the fly, but the language about such units shall not be occupied by more than 3 persons was the existing language. We were, like many of the articles where we are looking to make changes, we were trying to be thoughtful about not making, just too many sweeping changes. So there is always concern with, now we've released this, that it could be rented to non-family, housekeeper residing, and so we kept the shall not be occupied by more than 3 persons because of the space and the thought that if you start having more than 3 people, maybe it's a different type of rental and it might be more objectionable, so. And the other was, there was another concern that we were just discussing, and I'm already forgetting what we were, the 2-year, again, as John said, we were concerned about not trying to make it too difficult, and so we did strike the language to require gutting if it wasn't being used as an accessory dwelling and returning to its previous status. But having every 2 years does allow for some kind of basic check-ins and making sure that it's a space that's compliant with a standard of living that you'd want to rent it out as.
And Addie, would you mind identifying yourself for the home gamers?
I'm sorry. Addie Mae Weiss, 1 Jackson Road, member of the planning board.
Please.
Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street. 2 concerns that I know, because I talked with John earlier, I think he has responses to. One is the potential impact on the schools, especially if a property is flipped from the owner being the occupant of the major part of the dwelling to being the occupant of the smaller part of the dwelling, opening up a much larger part of the house for families with children. That's one. And then the second is what the impact, if any, is on our affordable housing quest. I don't know the answers to either, but I think John.
Care to respond?
Yeah, we regarded the change as minimal or not significant because we have these types of housing units in town now. They're not permitted, so they do exist and they do count in our census. So the number in terms of our affordable housing goal of 10%, these housing units are already counted because they've been the assessor, when they look at the property, they identify that. So they're already counted. If they're occupied by family members and a housekeeper, then everything's fine. If they're not, they're just not complying, and it may not be enforced. So with this passage, we'd like to see those come into compliance if they're not. So, but my point is that in terms of the affordable housing goal, that they're already counted. The only change, it says existing, so the only change here would be to the addition of an accessory apartment in the house, in a existing structure, either in an existing garage or in the existing house. So the change, the number of accessory apartments that would be added into an existing house is we regard it as not large. The space isn't large, so the impact on the number of school children that would be added, we regard it as not much, and the number of additional accessory apartments is not much. So they haven't been. It potentially would add, with those existing, the addition to additional apartments built would add to that, but that's the trade-off with housing diversity. So it's a good trade-off.
I've actually got a question I make. There's a bunch of references to the special permit granting authority. Who is that?
Let's see, I'll make sure I get this right. That's not a change, so.
That's whomever the existing special permitting authority is?
It's always been the Board of Appeals on this one.
Yeah, the ZBA.
Board of
yes.
Appeals? ZBA, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other public comments? If not, I'm going to close public commentary and bring it up here for advisory committee discussion. Questions, comments, concerns, guys?
I just wanted to comment to what Mike said earlier about the concern with the number of people, maybe allowing for more. So the more you let in, that property is already taxed at a certain level. So if you stuff more people in there, that's going to actually, if it were more children, let's say, that family grows, we're not getting any more tax dollars from that piece of real estate, because it's already at an assessed value. If you allow, you'll be hurting the schools if there are 2 school-age kids. So if that 4th child, or the 2nd child goes to school, then you'd be hurting the schools. So I like 1,200 square feet for 3 people is reasonable. So you grow that big, you're in need for more space. Once you have that 2nd child, you'll need another bedroom. And you're probably not gonna get it out of that 1,200 square feet. You might, but
I was going to add a couple things. I think we have to remember, this is really to keep people in their houses also. It's another way to help particularly elderly citizens that maybe don't have kids but want to be able to offset some of the cost of their housing. So I think it provides, you're trading off against some of the other incentives. And I think we also don't, we don't want to dramatically increase the school necessarily. Having enough students at school is a good thing too, because then you have support for programs, you have critical mass for particularly the arts and some of the ancillary programs. So we don't want a small school necessarily either. So I think the limits make sense of 1,200 square feet and the 3 people, because it's a manageable number. And it's also, one thing I would point out is this makes it sort of official and it's approved. I'm sure there's probably situations in town where these exist and they're not currently being evaluated. And I know that there's been a couple instances, because I attend the Board of Health, where people have come in and they weren't sanitary conditions and their hot water heater was broken, had been broken for months. So I think causing it to be sort of an official zoning ruling would cause it to be a little bit better for both the tenants and the landlords and be defined. And finally, I agree with Mike about maybe making it be, if not 5 years, maybe 3 years or something. I think reviewing it every 2 years is probably going to go find to be pretty frequent. So that might be something we can consider either down the road or consider changing. So, but I'm in favor of the amendment.
Too, though, just a question on the timing there. The review process after 2 years or 3 years or 5, whatever the case may be, I guess I'm just picturing that would be a fairly light review that wouldn't involve nearly as much work as an initial review, right?
Hopefully. I don't know, but hopefully.
Steve, if I can speak to that, just as a practical matter, it still requires an application to the zoning board, it still requires a full filing fee, it still requires a hearing. Most people handle those hearings on their own, they don't bring in counsel. I suppose if there were neighbors who were upset, they might bring in counsel, but if there's neighbors who's upset, then it's good to have a hearing. Maybe you pick a longer term and then, apply that to anybody who hasn't had an enforcement action or something. I don't know, but it seems to me that a short term of 2 years, think if somebody's, I don't know what they might charge for a unit like this, but a $500 filing fee or whatever it is now is probably a meaningful percentage of the rent they're going to get in that 2-year period.
Actually, one moment, please, Robert, if you would. Formally, we are up here in advisory discussion, right? So are there any other comments, questions on this from advisory specific? All right, then we'll open it back up to public commentary once again. Robert, please.
Just a possible suggestion, 2 years for the first time, 5 years after that.
That's great.
that's a better.
Great idea.
Any other public comments? If you just state your name and where you live, please.
Katerina Speck, 180 Western Ave. I'm quite in favor of a longer term for this amendment. The reason being is that this will not only be beneficial for people who are trying to stay in town after retirement, but also for people with disabilities who have it as another way to stay in town and have some help. So having somebody renewing every 2 years, considering disabilities, could be also burdensome. So I'm in favor of a longer period, and just like it was suggested before, maybe initial one could be a good review, but I would be open to even more like a 10, 15-year licenses to make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as far up here, are there any other public comments at the moment? No. As far as up here, the idea of a short term and then a longer term seems appealing in general, right? Is that appealing to you guys? Is that?
That's not.
That's not what we have to vote on.
Right.
I know, so that's what where I was going with is,
It could be
that could
further
be-
amended.
That could be amended, what,
In the
at
future.
the town meeting? Verbally? Is that the
Well,
process?
they have to have it written down, but
Right.
yes.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. My questions are answered. Anyone else up here? Okay, I'm gonna try this, guys. I'll take a motion for positive action on Article 18.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor? Yeah, that's 7-0. That's Article 18.
Take a vote on these, Paul?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Steve, the Board of Selectmen are hearing this also, and
Do you guys need to vote?
to give us an opportunity.
Microphone, Paul?
We're hearing this presentation at the same time you are, and the board hasn't taken a position on any of these articles. So I'm wondering if we could find a place in your schedule to let us also vote on these articles so that we have a position.
Sorry, I hadn't known that you hadn't made the votes yet. I had missed that. Certainly, we're happy to make a place for you guys to make a vote. Obviously, we already have voted at this point in time, but we'll be happy to hear your input on this as a board.
So does anyone want to make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to recommend this article as favorable action on this article as presented.
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. And I would just say, I support the idea. I think it's a great initiative for the town. I am a little put off by the couple of issues that I raised, but, I'll support it now and hope that by town meeting, some of the language may get changed.
But just to respond to that, I think this is a step in the right direction. It's overdue in many ways. It hasn't been utilized much, or if at all, in the past. And therefore, I think the benefits outweigh the need for these additions, which I don't oppose at all. But I think we ought to get this passed. This is a
So we
good
got-
step.
You got a motion and a second, all in favor of supporting? Okay, so.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Alrighty, we're gonna move on then to Article 19. Article 19, again, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but this is zoning for outdoor entertainment. And I will pass the mic back to Mr. Higley once again.
Yeah, John Higley, Saddlebrook Road, Chairman of the Planning Board. So Article 19 is outdoor entertainment in the business general district, where we have a bylaw now. This amends Section 3.2 as it appears in the warrant article. We've since, as a result of the planning board hearing, we did make some changes, and I'll just describe those. But the basic purpose of this article is to respond to the interests that the town has voted in the 2014 survey. It was loud and clear in the working group, in the general plan built environment working group, where unanimously everybody thought the best thing the town, a great thing the town could do was add vibrancy. It's very consistent with what's going on in Massachusetts. It's well recognized that demographically the next generation is moving to the city, in part because of the opportunity for social interaction and the vibrancy that's there. We're certainly very happily seeing that that generation is interested in moving back to the burbs, but they don't want it the same as their parents. They do want more vibrancy. We see the towns that have a more active town center opportunities for interaction are growing faster. Property values are higher. Certainly, access to the city is part of that. So this article is to add opportunities for social interaction and town center vibrancy. So the revision here is right now we have outdoor entertainment allowed at a restaurant where they are allowed up to two events per year, nonprofit events per year. This changes it so it applies to the whole of business general, not just restaurant. It certainly gives the existing restaurant, opportunity to increase their business. It allows other businesses to increase their business if it helps. So In the past, when we talked about this, there's been big concern about noise, and that's a big feature here. We had a lot of discussion at the planning board hearing. So the language that's in Article 1934B, we replaced that whole section. It says amplified music is permitted, and then it goes on to specify decibels according to L10 guidelines and things like that. We've now recommended that be changed and replaced with the same language that appears in other towns where we've recommended a change. First, in A, it says music, we changed that to amplified sound, and we changed it through the really discussion for those for and against this through a compromise saying must cease properly, and we changed it to 10:30 instead of 11 on Fridays and Saturdays and 9 p.m. Sunday, and then we struck out through Thursday evening. So this is limited to Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday, and the Fridays and Saturdays are to 10:30. We also changed the language, so we struck, it says exceptions may be granted by the ZBA, and we struck out for Sundays before a Monday holiday and changed that to 4 weekdays during May through October as part of the special permit. So that limits it to a season, so it provides quite a bit of limits. And then, as I say, the measurement, we just replaced amplified B, the amplified sound music that refers to 85 decibels, and L10 to, and I'll just read it. The measurement of sound or noise shall be made with a sound level meter meeting the standards prescribed by ANSI S1.4-1971 Type 1 or Type 2. The instrument shall be maintained in calibration and good working order. Calibration check shall be made of the system at the time of any noise measurement. Measurements recorded shall be taken so as to provide a proper representation of the noise source during the measurement. Microphones shall be positioned so as not to create unnatural enhancement, diminution of the measured noise. A windscreen for the microphone shall be used when required. Traffic, aircraft, and other transportation noise sources and other background noises shall not be considered in taking measurements except where such background.
It's time.
So we specified that and specified that sort of more details can be adopted in the Zoning Board of Appeals regulations about that, and then we put a maximum of 75 decibels.
So we're open for public commentary here, public questions,
Could I ask a question?
please.
The old bylaw allowed for an extension of the 9 p.m. Sunday when there is a Monday holiday. The new bylaw precludes that, and I'm wondering what the thinking was, why the time period between 9 and some later time on a Sunday before a holiday is now being taken out of the bylaw.
Please.
It was the result of a lot of discussion trying to protect the rights of the abutters. So this was a compromise language. Our original language, as you know, we had that in there for Sundays before a holiday, a Monday holiday. So this is the language we voted on at the planning board hearing, but the reason was, the real goal was to just reduce the number of days where outside amplified sound can be used, and this was how we did it.
I'm just suggesting that you're allowing all weekdays to have amplified sound.
No. Because the original warrant article, that's correct. So you're correct. But in the version that we approved or recommended at the planning board hearing, we struck through. It reads, amplified sound must cease properly at 10:30 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays and 9 p.m. on Sunday. And
But
then
then-
it says, exceptions may be granted.
That's the important thing I'm trying to point out. Exceptions may be granted by the ZBA for weekdays, but not Sundays, during May through October as part of the special permit. And I'm suggesting to you, if you're going to allow it till 10:30 on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, why are you opposed to allowing it to go to 10:30 on a Sunday night before a Monday holiday?
Yeah, I understand your point. The focus, I can answer, may not agree with it, but the answer is, we focused on saying that the article reads with our recommendation on Fridays, Saturdays, and to 10:30 PM and Sunday at 9 PM. And then exceptions, we said exceptions on weekdays. Yes, we could have said exceptions on Sunday when it's before a Monday holiday. We could have said that.
Yes, I'm suggesting that seems like a great date. I mean, if you have a 4th of July that's occurring on a Monday, and some event is occurring on the 3rd of July, which happens to be a Sunday, they have to end earlier and cannot get an exemption.
Yep.
Whereas 6 other days of the week, you could get an extension
Right.
to 10:30.
Yep, I see your point.
Well, but John, I think there might be a misunderstanding here. I think you're saying it's not allowed on weekdays under the normal bylaw. It's only allowed on an exception basis.
Correct.
So
Correct, but you can grant a special, Paul's point is.
I understand, but it's not an automatic that it's allowed on weekdays, is the point. It used to say it was allowed on weekdays till 9 PM. Now it can only be on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Or
on
Friday,
Fridays.
Saturday, Sunday, I apologize.
Correct, yeah. Yep, it's a big difference, but
Yeah.
yeah. I understand, I also understand if you want to grant an exception, why not be able to grant an exception on a Sunday before a Monday holiday? And I get that.
Which really, so therefore it would say, exceptions may be granted by the ZBA May through October. Right, we don't even need to put a date in that case, a day of the week in that case?
Yes, you could do that. You also could say, exceptions may be granted by the ZBA for Sundays before a Monday holiday and weekdays. We could do that too. Either way accomplishes the same thing.
I would think it'd be more clear, just to say, again, exception may be granted by the ZBA, May through October, right? If it's all 7 days, no need to specify, but woman's opinion. Addie, you have a comment? Or Steve? Mike?
Sure. I think Addie wants to speak to
So
this.
I'm sorry, I guess there was a lot of discussion on this, and there was a lot of scribbling and notes. Addie Mae Weiss, 1 Jackson Road Planning Board. The original language did suggest that an exception could be granted by the ZBA for Sundays before a Monday holiday, with the idea that potentially Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday could be until 9 PM just by right. In the language originally. So it was struck because there were concerns about 365 days a year, too many functions going on. So I think in the attempt to change the, allow for by special permit during the weekday, intending for Monday through Wednesday, Monday night, Wednesday night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we might have lost that intent that it was up to 9 PM during those 3 days, and the exception granted by the ZBA for Sundays before a Monday holiday, I think the original intent was that in those situations, the time should be allowed to go till 10:30 PM, because if it was a Sunday before a Monday holiday, it's essentially, for a lot of people, like a Saturday night. So I think somehow in the language, we've missed what our intent was, what we were trying to do. A second concern just is that there was a lot of discussion on what that maximum decibel limit should be. And it was suggested, Gino had suggested, because we are struggling with that number, that maybe that in some towns have a chart for different times of day, and that those numbers be put in regulations as opposed to being in our zoning, because being in regulations would allow us to essentially fine tune as we get more experience with this. Because it depends, everything needs to be in context when you're dealing with sound. Sound just, I've spent the last week just with my decibel meter going around listening to, okay, there's a DJ outside on the deck at the ski hill, what is that 50 feet away measure at? And we're well over 85 decibels. And I'm not saying that we want a lot of loud music in town, but because you have a range of sound and it's not really, we don't know enough to set it at 75 or 85. I think
Thank you, Addie.
the goal would be to take that exact number out and say, reference that sound must be kept to a maximum in accordance to the chart.
Steve?
Yes.
I was going to compliment the planning board on two things. One was having the standards for how you measure sound in the bylaw, which I think is important and which a lot of good bylaws do. And second, contrary to what Addie just said, I think it's important to have a decibel level in there. I think this is a pretty good level. I think, I've read a lot of noise bylaws from around the country and around Massachusetts. This is well within range, particularly when you're not talking about industrial sound, but you're actually talking about sound that's going to be pretty close to a residential neighborhood. And it's verifiable, and there's a big difference. In fact, 85 decibels is twice as loud as 75 decibels, right? Because it's a logarithmic scale. I think so. That's a big qualitative difference. I would suggest that you leave the 75 in there, and if people want to make adjustments in the future because of some experience we've had, we could do that. But this looks pretty good to me.
Thank you. Yeah, please, Richard.
Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street. I'm just going to say I completely disagree with you, unfortunately, Mike. I think that because I was at, I think, both of the hearings on this, the discussion back and forth about sound levels convinced me that a bylaw is a very, very clumsy way to deal with a new bit of regulation that this town just doesn't have experience with. And I really would strongly suggest it come out, that the planning board be given the flexibility over the course of a year or two to figure out how the best way is to regulate it and the best way to specify those regulations. And then if it belongs in a bylaw, put it in. But it just seemed to me as though there was an awful lot of unknowns and unknowables at this point.
Thank you.
Could I just respond, Steve, which is if there's no decibels in this bylaw, there's absolutely no standard to hold the entertainment to. People are going to be getting licenses for 2 years with I guess we have a nuisance bylaw, so it would just be, are you creating a nuisance or not? I think that's a bad idea. What we do have, Rich, is experience through other communities that have adopted similar standards and through planning and other policy discussions that have pointed out that this is a reasonable range, and I'm not saying it's precise and could be higher, could be lower, but I think it's reasonable.
Thank you, Mike.
Sorry, I'm not suggesting at all that we don't have a number set, because I do agree. We need a number, otherwise it's subjective. Loud to one person is not loud to another person. The idea would be that there would be those specific numbers would not be written in our zoning, but they'd be written in the regulations. So there would be a chart that would say the maximum for an evening function is 75 decibels, perhaps. But by being in the regulations as opposed to zoning, if Heritage finds that 75 decibels is just too low, which I do from doing a lot of research, just looking at other wedding venues. 85 decibels is where most wedding venues have, and a lot of those are, the Pierce House in Carlisle is surrounded by abutters, and there's others that also have abutters that are concerned. We need a number, definitely. I just don't believe that it should be in our zoning. I believe it should be in the regulations, which allows for a little bit more tweaking as we learn more of how sound is in this town.
Thank you.
Hi, Seth Malloy, 176 Western Ave. I just had a couple of things. The first one is
The frequency is kind of concerning to me that we're switching from 2 events a year to every weekend. I think that's potentially a big change for abutters. Even if it's not terribly loud, it still could be problematic for them, but it is a business district, so it's not completely unreasonable. And the second thing was kind of to follow on what Richard was saying. I did a lot of the research that kind of precipitated the change from the previous language to to how the sound is measured. And I do think that there's a lot we don't know. We've looked at other towns' bylaws, but we haven't talked to them to see if they're effective. We haven't, I think there's just a lot of things that we don't know, and we're rushing to change it to kind of get it in, and it seems like maybe we should put more thought into it.
Thank you. Can I just get a clarification real quick? As the article stands now, it's 85 decibels, right? And so that certainly could be changed then at next all-time meeting, right? We say, you know what, let's knock it down to 75 or move it up to 150 into the AC/DC here, right? But so what was the other option that you had said of how it could be done? To put in
Regulation.
a regulation rather than a bylaw? Okay, thank you. George?
I just wanted to just say how much I support this article. I think you guys have done a great job on the planning board, and I think this is great for the business district. It encourages more business, encourages the businesses to do well. It gives them more opportunity to succeed in our town, and I think we really need to encourage businesses to have more options to be successful here. So I really want to commend you on that.
Please, whoever would like to step up, just step right up and
On the line.
on the line.
Yeah.
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue. I'm in favor of, in 34A, deleting during May/October. No one is going to want to be out in November through April, and the abutters will have their windows closed. So the elimination of that period is needless. So let's strike verbiage that isn't doing anything. And then for a second point, I have 2 options. One option is in 34B, changing 75 to 60. I'll show you something.
Didn't hit a bullhorn.
This is great.
What? Sorry, Betsy, I can't hear you. Would you turn that bloomin' vacuum cleaner off?
If that's not minutes. I want note of a vacuum.
75 decibels is the sound of a vacuum cleaner. Who would want to be sitting on one's porch enjoying a conversation with one's spouse and having a vacuum cleaner operating between them? 60 decibels is conversational speech. So I think if we're going to be talking at where the abutter is, you want the abutter to be able to speak to his wife without having to shout or not be able to be understood. So I think that it's appropriate to change it from 75, where you can't speak to your spouse, to 60, which is conversational. An alternative is option 2, change in 34B the current at the complaint location or that portion of public way closest to the complainant. Delete that and put instead 50 feet from the source. Now, the reason for that is from the website of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, quote, long or repeated exposures to sounds at 85 decibels can cause hearing loss. if 85 decibels is measured at 50 feet, then everyone within the 50-foot radius is in danger of hearing loss. Now, if it's down to 75, I'll be back.
Care to respond?
Sorry, if we're doing example, this is where I just don't think we know enough to know what the right number is. I mean, like I said, I've been going around with my decibel meter, and this morning with the phone sitting in the kitchen where for the 10 minutes, which is kind of where you get this L10, what's your average over 10 minutes? It peaked at 92 decibels. All that was happening was the kids were running to get out the door to the bus, and then at 46 decibels was when I clicked the button and it was measuring the dog drinking the water. So it's just such a variety. This afternoon, just the after-school extended day kids on the Pine Hill playground, it maxed at 89 decibels. The average was 75 decibels of the kids on the Pine Hill playground. There were only about 20 kids out there. The library after school, just the air vent going across humming. Nobody else was in the library. I was waiting for my daughter to get out of band practice. Again, the average was 72 decibels. I just don't think we know enough to think what we're going to put that limit at. I think we need a number, a max, we've done a lot of research and we've looked at a bunch of towns that do have regulations. 85 is a pretty standard number for most towns. If we're going to pick a number, I think we should follow what most towns have, is 85. I'm saying 85 is, they say 85 and then we have measured 50 feet from the source. So you're not putting your speaker right at 85, and the idea is the abutter is not necessarily hearing 85 decibels. It's the people that are at the function.
50 feet from the source.
Right.
Right, understood.
And maybe that's too high, and that's why we don't know enough to have that number in our zoning. We need it in the regulations where it could be adjusted easier.
Please, Paul.
Just speaking as a lawyer, I would caution not having a standard 50 feet from the source. The problem with that is that means a very intrusive enforcement process where you enter upon private property and you're setting up meters 50 feet from a bride and a groom that puts you right in the middle of the wedding. When we write these things, we always use a portion of a public way because your enforcement people have a right to be there. They don't need to get a warrant. It's all so simple. It avoids all kinds of legal entanglements. To measure things on private property brings with it a whole host of potential legal problems.
Thank you.
My understanding, Seth Malloy, 176 Western Ave. My understanding is they changed it to mirror the Nantucket rule that said you should measure it at the point of complaint, not 50 feet from the source. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I think that's what the proposal is.
As written, what I see here at the moment is 50 feet from source.
The amended version?
No, the amended version is,
Oh.
it says it's portion of the public way closest to the complainant. Or that's how the amendment reads.
I guess I'll bring out, I know you haven't brought it up here, but I think we've sort of spent a lot of time last Thursday night and we didn't bring it up here yet, is who's measuring, who owns the devices in which to measure. It's great to have all these requirements, and I'll save Robert a little time. Robert's in favor of the police department measuring because they would be unbiased and independent. Obviously, not every homeowner, even the ones that live on Main Street, are going to have their own sound measuring devices, so it is a little bit pointless to have decibels in there if we don't have anyone capable of measuring. Do we need to put in the capital budget or the operating budget for the town to own some recording devices? Do we need to stipulate that any establishment that applies for this permit has to acquire a sound measuring device? And the advantage of to me, of the venue having the device is that it can buy the kind that has a recording capability, so you have the sound over a period of time, and they can perhaps shut it off if the band takes a break or something, so you're not averaging 20 minutes of no sound and 40 minutes of loud sound. So maybe you want to, in the condensed version, give us an idea what our options are.
Please, go ahead, John.
John Higley, Saddlebrook Road, Planning Board. So we talked at length about this and agreed that the details that Mr. Waldron's mentioning should be in the regulation section. And that, because that way they can be changed without it being a zoning bylaw change. And the idea was that these sound meters range in price, but generally a type 1 or type 2, a type 2 sound meter starts at about $100 and maybe $250. The calibrator, that the language here says it's got to be calibrated at the time it's used. So the calibrator costs about the same or a little bit more. So around $400 or $500 you can have something that calibrates. Now we can talk about NIST traceable and things like that. That adds another $100 or so. And there's two ways to do it. You can send the meter in, or you can pay extra for your calibrator, and you can spend $4,000 or $5,000 if you really want to go crazy with all this. But likely we're talking about $300 or $400 for a meter, and the onus here, and we recommend in the regulation that it require the venue. As long as it's calibrated, the planning board felt that's good enough. We don't need to, we can trust that the thing is calibrated correctly, particularly if we witness the calibration, so that it's not necessary for the police to have it and drive around. On the other hand, it was pointed out, it's not a lot of money, and if we feel like we want the police to have another instrument, they can do that. So it's not enough to inhibit the police, but we think the regulations should require the property owner to do it, because the property owner is the one that's got to be responsible for their sound.
Steve?
Please, go ahead,
Can I
Paul.
just make a comment on that? This is a zoning bylaw, and by statute, it's enforced by the building inspector. He's the zoning enforcement officer. It's not enforced by the police unless you make specific provision for a general bylaw in addition to this that would have a penalty enforced by an enforcing person, namely the police. So the police aren't involved in this. This is a building inspector issue.
Thanks, Paul. That was one of the questions that I was going to have for sure, is who's in charge of this, right?
I think that imposes two problems, though. One is you just, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Paul, you just said earlier that we should consider having it measured at the public way. Well, if we have the facility or the venue being the one that owns it, it's likely not going to be located at the public way. It's going to be located somewhere on the private property or the, so that we'd have to straighten those two differences out. And the other problem is I understand the legality of the building inspector, but he probably doesn't work weekends. So, at 10:15 p.m. on a Saturday night, if it's loud, people aren't going to be calling the building inspector, I don't think.
Mike?
Well, I was going to say the way zoning is enforced is by the building inspector, but it's in response to a complaint typically. So what's going to happen is the neighbor, and we used to have a neighbor to the Sherburne Inn or the Heritage that used to complain about noise, and we didn't have a specific noise standard. It was just perceived to be too loud, and the police were called. But what would happen in an enforcement situation is that person would complain to the building inspector, and they'd have to offer some evidence that it was too loud on a particular day, or the building inspector would have to hire a consultant or stake out the place to see if in fact it was too loud. But these things get enforced as an exception. I mean, most of the time what they do is they keep people in line, and it's somebody's a bad actor, then there's an enforcement issue. But having a standard at least gives people something to understand that the town doesn't want them to be as loud as possible. And I would say the 85 decibels, to Robert's test of the vacuum cleaner there, I've got a little chart here that I pulled up, but a vacuum cleaner is 75 decibels. At 85 decibels, it's a snow blower. It's pretty loud.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't want to reiterate our discussion Thursday night, which went on until 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. But, from a practical point of view, you have to be able to more or less not enforce it formally, but enforce it at least informally on the fly. It's a weekend, it's loud, the neighbors can't sleep. So the building inspector isn't playing a role in that case. So I think measuring at the portion of the public way, as Paul said, allows anyone to go and check it out. And it takes into account the effect of distance. I mean, I don't know at what distance you're measuring the snow blower or the vacuum, but, you know, there's a formula for this. It degrades at a certain rate through the air. And with barriers, it's even faster. So it's very site-specific. So I think if we're going to put in a site of measurement, it could be either or both, actually. Either and or something like that, at the 50 feet or the nearest public way.
I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Ben.
So the new language reads amplified sound. That's certainly better than music, but it seems like there can be lots of non-amplified things that could be extremely annoying at a distance. You know, a bass drum, for example, or fireworks. Does somebody have a concise definition of what the L10 is? That measuring over a 10-minute period, or and taking the average, or is it the top 10th percentile?
Yeah, there's a lot of different methods of measurement, and the L10 method is one. Let's see how to keep it simple. It requires measuring over time, and for a portion of the time it can be over the limit. And so it's averaging over a period of time. As we talked about it, we said, hey, when the band takes a break, then that counts towards the average time, and that's not what we want. So the L10 measurement method, we decided did not fit. So that's why we switched the language to a different type of measurement that's specified by the ANSI method, and that still allows time measurement and data logging. By specifying 75 dBA as a maximum, then the type 1 or type 2 meter allows data logging so that you just can't go over that period.
Oh, okay, that's good.
So it takes away, it simplifies it. It's also what other towns do.
All right, I was afraid it was, you know, like you'd have some percentage of the time it could be over the limit.
And that's correct.
And then that could certainly be very annoying in
Right.
a number of
Well,
cases.
thanks to a lot of people that put a lot of time into this discussion, I think the language we have here is taken right from other towns. So for that reason, the L10 method is.
All right, but would you consider, further generalizing from amplified sound to just all sound from the event?
Yep, yeah, is sound emitting from the event, something is, that makes sense.
Please, just head right on up there. Robert, please let the gentleman speak first.
Frank Hook, Town Line Road. First of all, let me say that I'm very much in favor of this. I think it's an excellent thing for our town and for our town center. It's one of the things we need to do to liven up Sherborne and bring more people, finances into Sherborne, help Sherborne out. One thing I would say is that the intent of this is to draw young people. I don't want to throw another worm in in this, but one might think of the 10:30 time frame as something to think about as well. And maybe, if you do have the decibel in a regulation versus in the zoning bylaw, that there could be a tapering off, yet the event can still go on. It can still maintain and still draw those young people, because they do tend to stay out a little bit later, and yet also be something that would be good for the abutters. So, I'd like to see something like that in the language too.
Robert, please.
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue, and would you believe it? This was what we're talking about was my next point.
Perfect.
In the earlier one, it specified that the permit holder should have a meter, and I believe that that should continue to be. Otherwise, the permit holder, how do they know if they are exceeding the limit? So it should be added, the permit holder shall have a sound level meter meeting the standards of ASNI S 1.4 1971, Type 1 or Type 2, and IEC 1979. And also, along with that, I would add, it is strongly encouraged that the town purchase a sound level meter with NIST certification for use by the PD or zoning enforcement officer.
Thank you. So do you have the actual wording here that you're suggesting?
Yeah, this is,
Thank you.
if I can get it out.
Trust that you can.
There it is.
Thank you.
The one about the applicant, the permit holder shall have a, and then sound level meter.
Thank you, Robert. Last time. Getting close to the end of the public comment here, just for the moment.
Yeah, just two quick comments. One is, we think that, I don't disagree with who should hold it, but we think that should be in the regulation. And the other thing is that we found that the IEST 1979 is expired, so it doesn't exist. So we struck it. There's an IES, but it's a difference in it. And we feel that the ANSI Type 1 and Type 2 cover everything. So it's not necessary to have a third standard. So that's why it's not in, IES isn't in there.
Thank you. So I'm going to close this off to public comment for the moment, and I'm bringing it up here to the advisory committee. Let's have at it. Want me to go first? Go ahead.
Mr.
Fire
Chairman, one appeal to this bylaw was that it employed both the common best practices of other towns and evidence-based standards, which is always a part, I believe, of good governance that protects the goodwill of all. So I like the way it was written, and I applaud the planning board for listening and incorporating all participants over the multiple hearings that you've had. And so both as written, the decibel, how it's measured, I think sets an initial good standard.
Anyone else? Jeff, you want to have a crack?
Well, yeah, I think I'll mirror what Pete said. That first of all, the planning board, John and Marion and Addie and their whole team did a fabulous job, and they also incorporated way more input from all citizens of town that attended on this, and it was quite a long discussion and a good discussion, and provided some of the revisions. So I think, first of all, we should really be thankful that they did that. Also shows that there's almost nothing that Sherburne can't make more complicated than it needs to be. But the last thing I wanted to mention, while this covers all entities in the Sherburne Business District, I'm not expecting Dunkin' Donuts to have rock bands out the parking lot there. I want to mention that the Heritage people, I don't think they're here tonight, but they were at the planning board last Thursday, and they were unbelievably cooperative and willing to adapt their practices and be subjected to differing standards. So they were, not that they'll always be the owners or that there aren't other venues that could be candid, but I just want to commend the people from the Heritage for being super supportive of finding something that works for Sherburne. They were very, very positive.
As for me, I am generally in favor of the growth of this community, specifically in the business zone. I think that the town has to grow. If you don't grow, then you're, in relative terms, you're falling backwards against other towns. I think that this would allow for some of the few businesses that would make use of this to grow and thrive. I do think that the wording, the decibel levels, certainly I understand can be up for debate, whether 75, 85 snow blowers, vacuum cleaners, whatever the case may be, kids at X day, right? But I think that, so I think if possible to do some sort of scaling via regulation would be great. I do agree with the updated iteration that says that the measurement should be at the, can someone clarify
At the complainant location or that portion of public way closest to the.
to me, that's a better way to do this. And so at this point in time, I plan to vote in favor of. Anyone else have comments?
I agree. So thank you to the planning board for all of your hard work, as always, and bringing this forward. I think it's a starting point. So, and I think Addie's point of a regulation that gets to the fine tuning, so allows us more flexibility as a town to adjust things. So, but you need to have some place to start.
Stephen?
Yeah, I'm generally in favor of this as well. It seems like there are a couple of strategies for deciding what's, everyone wants to know what's too loud. Setting a simple level in the zoning bylaw might be a little bit blunt, but I think as Steve said earlier, you could change that each year at the annual town meeting if necessary. If we decided this is too lax, this is too restrictive, that seems acceptable to me. On the other hand, I also like the idea of having a more scaled and nuanced chart in the regulation. I guess my question, and this is probably just my own ignorance, is that so how is that regulation set, and how would it be set initially? How would it be amended? What is the sort of public input that would be used surrounding adjusting that regulation?
I'll just add one more thing. I still am a little bit unclear as to how this gets, how this is truly monitored, right? 10:30 at night, Chris Canny is probably not hopping out of bed to go take a measurement at a public way. I wouldn't think. Maybe he is, right? So that part I still am a little bit hazy on, which is kind of my concern because, a rule or bylaw that's written that can't be enforced is just a waste of paper. So that's my challenge. Do we have any more comments, questions up here? No? I'll open it back up to public.
Yeah.
Paul, why don't you go ahead real quick?
Well, I want to have an opportunity for the Board of Selectmen to discuss this.
Certainly.
Give you our recommendation before you
We
take
will
the
certainly
final
do so. After we do the last round of public hearings, I'd defer to you guys and we'll just pause. Is that fair enough? Does that work for you guys?
That's fine, sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
180 Western, Katrina Speck. As far as I understand it, right now, I don't have to call anybody to come and do measurements. And in the future, I see a possibility that every summer weekend, I'm going to have drunken drivers on Western Ave. I'm going to have to hear oomps, 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 oomps. And I go to bed at 9 o'clock. I have to work in Boston and commute back, make money, actually pay here for taxes and everything. And in all honesty, kids don't care whether it's weekend or work day. They still wake up at 5 in the morning, and that's what you have to deal with. So what happened to the limitations of how many events per year can be hosted by a venue? I mean, twice a year, a summer, it's fine. I can deal with that. But if business takes off and it's every single weekend, I understand I'm trying to be a member of a vibrant community, but sometimes we chose this place to have a family and have a quiet, bucolic life. And in all honesty, this is a Ritzy community where there is this sense of tranquility. And this is not something I would like to lose. So what I'm pushing towards is some form of limitations on number of events per year, and some form of control and responsibility of drunken driving. If you have an accident on Western Ave, maybe your license is revoked for serving alcohol.
Well, those are fair points. I would dare say that the police in this town are in charge of drunk driving and policing those activities, whether on Western Ave or Woodland Street or Main Street or wherever the case may be. But valid points, thank you.
I think we should just clarify, though, on this item alone, and I think your point is valuable. This is only for business district, so I don't think Western Ave is zoned that way, is it?
No.
So technically, Western Ave this doesn't cover Western Ave. This is just downtown business district, article number 19, I think.
John, do you have something else?
Yeah, it's business general. Just in terms of enforcement and regulations, in this case, the zoning board would be responsible for the regulations, and they can adjust and change them the same way they do now, same way Board of Health regulations work, planning board regulations. They don't require going to town meeting for a 2/3 vote. So that's the advantage, and it's a system well in place. In terms of the previous language that appears in the warrant article saying the permit holder is responsible, that we believe should be in the regulation. The details of that should be in the regulation. But that allows, if there's a noise complaint, you speak to your neighbor, you don't have satisfaction, typically people call the police. If the police say to the business in Business General, show me your sound meter, the data, then they've got something. And that process means that if you do it once, you don't want to do it again, because if you're a business owner, you don't want to lose your permit. So, and there's also opportunity for fining if you're breaking a zoning bylaw. There's up to $300 per event fine that's allowed. So there are enforcement tools, but a policeman right now can just say, gee, turn it down, where this allows the property owner, the business owner, to have data and actually use it maybe to prevent the whole problem in the first place. But those details ought to be in the regulation.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to close the public commentary period now, and guys.
Do we have a motion or anything on the table to start discussion?
I'd move favorable action on the article.
I'll second that.
I would say the article that's before us is a little different than what the planning board is saying that it's going to be. That's why I'm going to just say favorable action. You are talking about changing the decibel levels to such levels as may be established by the planning board, but that's not the article that's here before us. So I think favorable action is general enough to say that we support what you do. We think this is a step in the right direction. Looks like there was a number of ideas for little tweaks to this thing. We hope you consider those tweaks, including my point about Sundays. But whether you do or not, I support it. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Okay, yeah. Again, this is another one where I think it's a good idea. I actually was, as I said before, more impressed with the original language than all these tweaks that have happened since then. I mean, one thing we do in Sherburne a lot is we make things really hard when they don't need to be hard. There are a lot of other towns that have noise bylaws that have been in place for years, and some of them are effective. Most of those that I'm familiar with, you wouldn't have the property owner doing the monitoring. You'd have a standard, and if it became an issue, then somebody would come in and monitor. I mean, it might be protective for the property owner to do that, but if you're running a small business, you really don't want to have somebody during the event who's responsible for going out to the street with a measuring device to measure noise. That's a burden on the business. We're trying to lift a burden from the business and try to make the downtown more vital. So I'm supportive of the concept. I think we tweak this and tinker with it at its peril, though. So we have a vote on this to support?
Well, just one more comment.
Yeah.
That the town of Sherburne can adopt a general bylaw regulating noise. And that's how most communities address this and make it town-wide, that you simply can't create noise anywhere. And while this is focusing on business district, we don't want loud noises in residential areas either. We don't want your next door neighbor to have a huge noise-making event that disturbs all the neighbors. We don't have that noise bylaw. We could have a noise bylaw, but that's not what this is. This is specifically to allow events at certain kinds of locations and certain kinds of activity. So it's much more limited, but we do have the option, as I think where Mike was heading, for the Board of Selectmen to put together a general bylaw regulating noise.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily suggesting we would do that, Paul. I'm just saying that even within the relatively narrow parameters of a specific zoning provision that applies in the business district only to businesses that have these outdoor entertainment permits, I still think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think there's
pretty good, things to measure ourselves against or to use as models. And I would like to see a number in this. And I like the fact that it does specify how you measure things and so forth. And I guess, Addie, I had a question about your meter. Was that taking instantaneous measurements, or did you actually have it measuring over time and taking the L10 or whatever the standard was? Okay.
And Addie, is that just an app on your phone?
It's just a phone app, so calibration is possibly questionable. I'm not saying it's standard, I'm just saying it was surprising. I guess that's where I am most concerned about, there is a spectrum and noise. A lot of towns do have noise limits, and we've looked at them. The thing is, a lot of the towns do have noise limits that apply to the entire town. So what we're trying to do, though, is, I guess, we're looking at saying that, certain events like Brewfest and outdoor, nobody's ever measured what the concert on the green level is, but we don't have that historical data to know, but that's what we're used to. All of a sudden, I guess it's just, when you start measuring, you start realizing a band playing or even a DJ playing is not exactly the same standard that you want to hold. You want to hold them to the same standard that you hold everybody in their everyday lives to. The events are a little bit different situations, and we're not saying that these events are going to be allowed 24/7 either. There are going to be reasonable, and the nuisance bylaw still applies to everything in town, and that everyone in town still has the right to ask their neighbor to be neighborly and turn it down. So you want to be getting so regulatory that we've got a standard that's so low that we're constantly triggering it. I don't know.
So can we
We should
vote?
take a vote, yeah.
Okay.
So the motion was
You
to
got a motion,
take
second?
favorable action.
Support. Okay, so we'd support this, at least in general terms.
So then I'll bring it back up here. Can I get a motion for favorable action on Article 19?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? We're good? Okay, all those in favor? It's 7-0 for Article 19. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to Article 20 now, zoning for farm events. I'll reiterate that there's a 5-minute time on the petitioner. If there are parts of this that are duplicative from other ones, you can kind of say that and save your time if you're, keep your powder dry for some other stuff.
Okay, John Higley, Planning Board, Settlebrook Road. So this was brought to the Planning Board. Planning Board worked on it and thought it was well worth being a warrant article and go to the town to vote on the. So the language here, same thing. We worked on it because it has the potential to provide additional income for farms, to enable them to have a secondary source of income that's incidental to the principal use of the agricultural operation. So, so this has a lot of the same sound measure. It's the same sound measurement, but the language here says farm structures and grounds may also be used for, and we recommend for events. Original language was non-traditional uses to host events, and we just said we recommend changing that language to events, including to but not limited to educational conferences, fundraisers, nonprofit entities, weddings, and other events. So it enables events. That's a key message. The next thing is that it goes through a site plan review. So that means that it's once it goes through the site plan review process, then it exists. The farm has the right to do this. The individual farm has a right to do this once they go through site plan review. There's a lot of rules and regulations in our site plan review section of the zoning bylaw. So that that includes things like parking and traffic control and things like that. So here we say music, and the same thing, we changed it. I won't repeat all the language changes, but it's the same as what we just discussed for the town center. I think the real key issues, I think, with this were right now, some farmers felt they could do this anyway. They don't need this through the state right to farm laws, and some felt that we'd better specify it in our own zoning bylaw, so that if a farm is going to take a barn, for instance, and modify it, significantly invest in the barn in order to enable it to be used for these things, they don't want it to be based on a one-plan special permit, a one-year special permit. This provides some security to that investment. So we think that's a good idea. Then we debated long and hard about this, putting in sound control and limits of the days. And in the end, we felt some control was appropriate. I think that covers it.
Thank you, John. So open for public comment, if anyone's got a comment?
Jonathan Hudson Walker, 32 Pleasant Street. My wife Lisa and I own a civil organic farm. I'm going to read a few paragraphs out of this document. It's Support Sherborne's Agricultural Heritage. And I think everybody here should have had a copy of that document. So we've had many requests from residents to use the barn for a special event, typically a wedding, a birthday, anniversary, bar mitzvah, family reunion. And we'd very much like to respond positively to these requests, as it'd be a great way for town residents to connect a special event with our rich agricultural heritage. And any usage fees are important for farm sustainability. We are very appreciative of the Planning Board's efforts to propose an amendment to the zoning regs that will permit event usage of farm buildings while providing controls to minimize any impact on abutters. This matter is about more than a zoning change. It's about supporting the few remaining active farms in Sherborne that contribute to the town's rural heritage and agricultural character. So how is this helping to protect Sherborne's agricultural heritage? The best way to protect and maintain farmland, in our view, is to actively use the farmland for agricultural purposes. That sounds great, the romance of farming. The reality of farming is it's a very difficult business, subject to many risks: weather, pests, commodity pricing, ever-escalating costs, more and more regulations, taxes, government fees, the list goes on. So for sustainability, farms need every dollar of income available for survival and sustainability. And conventional farming is increasingly uneconomic in suburban areas. The one advantage that suburban farms have is the proximity to major population centres, with people that want to connect with our agricultural heritage in a special way. Some call it agritourism, but it's more than that. Civil Organic Farm is a produce farm, but it's also an amazing place where you can be in touch with over 300 years of history. And all farms in Sherborne are rich with history and their own special character. And with the current zoning bylaws, it's not possible for the residents of Sherborne to have a special event that's an incredibly memorable experience and at the same time recognizes, appreciates, and contributes to any of those farms. The proposed zoning change will increase access to Sherborne's agricultural heritage in a personal and special way for all town residents. So why are events so important to our farms? Hosting events is very important for our farms. The special events typically at a time outside usual farm working hours, when the farm is not active, with planting or harvesting activity. The special event activity is very complementary to our farm operations. And more importantly, it brings people to the farm that might not otherwise visit, and it's a unique marketing opportunity for us. In addition, it's about as low impact a revenue source as is possible, certainly for us as an organic farm. It uses existing buildings, there's no hazardous byproduct, there's no negative effect on our soils and growing areas. The special events are high margin revenue compared to all other farm revenue. The farm does not have to incur significant input costs to generate the income. It's a very attractive proposition. And in today's suburban farming environment, hosting events is increasingly an accepted part of maintaining a viable and sustainable suburban farm business, and it's as equally important to the farm as is planting and growing crops. So at a business level, event income is critically important for helping with suburban farm financial viability and sustainability. So why are farms important to Sherborne? Good question. Most residents live here for the town's rural character and top-tier school system. Farms are a critically important aspect of that rural character as they shape the perception and feeling of place for the whole town. We've only got 3 commercial-scale fruit and produce farms remaining. Non-commercial farm-scale parcels of land are being sold off to 40B developers at an increasing rate. As I'm sure everybody here knows, there are 40B projects in progress on Green Lane, South Washington Street, Whitney Street, Coolidge Street, North Main Street. More will surely come. We provide a local community with certified organic, locally grown, freshly harvested produce that's available at nearby Whole Foods market stores, Brothers Market, the Holliston Superette, local restaurants, and soon Wegmans in Natick. We offer employment to many residents of Sherborne and local people. We also provide volunteer opportunities for DS high school students and a hands-on opportunity to learn about agriculture and sustainable growing practices. And other farms in Sherborne provide similar benefits and opportunities to town residents. So we think farms are certainly important. I know there are some comments say, gee, we should develop a lot, but in our view, we're very pro-farm. What are the negatives? There are always negatives. The principal consideration with events is traffic and noise, which are both important concerns. All of those 3 remaining active farms are on heavily trafficked roads. Kendall Avenue for Sunshine Farm, Route 27 Coolidge Street for Dowse Orchards, and Western Avenue for Silwood Organic Farm. Most abutters are already dealing with locations where thousands of vehicles pass their houses daily, and any periodic event traffic is going to be minimal in comparison. The real issue, as we've all been discussing, is noise for abutters. All of the active farms have farm owners living on the farm, so noise is an important consideration for the farm owners too. Most of the new text proposed for the zoning amendment, Article 20, deals with noise control and mitigation. In fact, it's the exact same language, I think, as Article 19, or substantially the same.
Time.
Do a quick wrap-up, if you
Quick
would,
wrap,
please.
30 more seconds. So the proposed language provides stringent, specific requirements that have been adapted from zoning regs and noise ordinances that work very well in other towns. So conclusion, if we want to retain our authentic agricultural character, the remaining farms need to be actively supported and encouraged. And we need all the help that is available. And on behalf of Sherborne's farm community, your support's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any other public comments at this time? Please.
Go ahead.
Please let her.
Katrina Speck, 180 Western. While I support the farms trying to get an alternative source of income, they are being taxed at the farm rate. So there is already financial assistance in that form. I support cultural events, I support volunteer opportunities and preserving heritage of this town. However, on traffic concern, I do know that the events start on a certain date and you get 200 cars coming in, they end at a certain period of time, and those 200 cars with tipsy drivers are exiting. So it is a concern about the traffic being peaking at those hours of operation. So therefore, I propose an event number limitation. If alcohol is served, there could be no more than 2 events like that per season. This way, we can help our farms achieve their alternate source of income and also encourage them to host events that are more culturally appealing than significant runs like weddings would present. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. John? Please.
Thank you very much. I left out an important comment. In the draft that's in the warrant article, C is the source of outdoor amplified sound must be a minimum of 100 yards. We struck that sentence in our revised
There's
version.
no C, whole thing.
No C. So we deleted the minimum 100 yards.
John, while you're still up there, are there other changes, amendments that we're not aware of? In other words, like A,
Yeah,
under
A and B are at the
A at
same
19, and 19, you said you changed it to 10:30 PM, and you eliminated Sunday through Thursday. So on Article 19, you made revisions to A and B.
Correct, and we did the same with farm events. We struck A and B.
Can you just tell us what the changed, because I don't have the
Okay.
italicized version, so.
Yeah, so
you
the
could
re-
just-
Copy, I don't know where Diane went, but
Well, he could probably read it to us.
Yeah, yeah.
If you just tell us what's changed since what was
So
published
we
and
struck
signed by the selectmen.
Yeah. In 3.4.3 farm events, we said may also be used for events including, so we struck non-traditional uses. Then we, in 3.4.3 farm events, A and B we struck and replaced with, and in the language, which we've already talked about, is the same, amplified sound must cease promptly at 10:30, and that's identical to the language. So that says 10:30 on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, 9 p.m. Sunday, and struck in the original through Thursday evenings. Exceptions may be granted by the planning board, this is the planning board this time, for weekdays during May through October as part of the site plan review. And then the next is a measurement of sound or noise, and that's what I read before for the town center.
And that's been struck, that's been, this
That's
C
in
has
there.
been struck.
Yep, yeah, and it replaces what we put in the warrant article. And then, as I say, C, we just struck C, the source of outdoor amplified sound must be a minimum of 100 yards from lot lines.
So the sound limit is 75 decibels also, as it was
Correct.
before? Okay, thank you.
75, okay.
Steve? Okay.
Oh, sorry, Mike, you have a comment?
I had a question before a comment. I mean, I guess my comment is I'm favorable with this. My question was more, if I could ask Jonathan a question. What's your reaction to the 75 decibel limit? Does that impose a concern for you or a constraint, or is that something that you would expect to see in a bylaw like this?
Go to the microphone, John, please.
So I also looked at some different noise ordinances in various towns. I think that's very consistent with other towns. I think the key thing is it's measured at the lot line or the location of the complainant, which is in the language as proposed. I think we're supportive of that.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess I would just say, I think this is in many ways a no-brainer. This is something that we need to do as a town to survive as a town that still has farms. This is a good step in a right direction. We're supporting an important community to the town, an important part of our town character by doing this. And I think the fact that it's going to be administered through an approval process allows for the kind of controls that people would be concerned about with things like traffic and duration of events and things like that.
So can I ask a question about that? So the permit's issued, they've done the site, but will there be regulations that say you need a police detail, or you can have this many cars or this many attendees?
Yeah, that's a process that exists in our bylaws, and the permit for that site details all that. So that goes into the permit.
Okay.
In order to get a liquor license, you have to come through the selectmen, and those are run past police as far as whether a detail's needed, et cetera.
Right, but that's to get the liquor license
Understood.
now, but once you have this permit, the site plan is going to set those regulations, so
Well, except
that
they
he
couldn't
has to
have
come
liquor,
and
they
get
couldn't have
that.
liquor at those events if they didn't have a liquor permit from the selectmen.
So you would still have to apply for a liquor license
event?
per event. I didn't realize that.
One day.
So this is just
Okay.
the ability to host an event and so when alcohol is served, there's still a permit issued out for alcohol.
That's right, and that in
Police are
part
therefore
addresses
aware.
the concern about drunk drivers, et cetera. Most of those permits of any size, the police are going to ask for a police detail, for
So then there's a
example.
forced detail with the 4 hours and all of that. Okay.
Paul?
I wanted to first support and urge you to adopt this. I agree with Mike, it's a no-brainer, but I also wanted to oppose the notion that there should be 2 events per year, whether alcohol is served or not. I think the whole purpose of this thing is to allow an additional stream of income, and if you try to put some kind of limitation of 2 events a year, that doesn't solve the problem. That really hamstrings the whole intent here. So I would say there should be no limitation on this, that whatever events that they can get, they should be able to have those events take place without that kind of restriction.
Hi, Seth Malloy, 176 Western Ave. So I just want to speak to kind of a lot of these issues we talk about are hypothetical, but we've already been experiencing these type of events in our neighborhood, and they are very disruptive. And there's already a history of complaints have been filed that has been corroborated with the police department. I think 3 abutters have discussed or have spoken about how much noise comes into their yards, and I think that having a limit on the number of events is really important, because I think one of the selectmen mentioned that, in residential neighborhoods, we don't want to have big events. We were just talking about it on the previous topic, because a lot of us love the tranquility and the peace that, that's why we came to Sherburne. Myself personally, we love to sit in the backyard, we don't sit that often inside in the summer. We sit mostly outside. And this is basically saying that every single weekend, we're going to have, even if you think, I took a decibel reading of my backyard and it was in the mid-30s. So even if something is 60, it's like having someone jabbering constantly at you in your backyard. I wanted to sit in my backyard, to listen to the owls, to hear all the small sounds that nature provides. That's what I think a lot of people really love about living in a rural kind of environment. And this would basically take that away. I would just lose my backyard. I'd have to go inside. And that's generally what we've done when these kind of events are being held. And it's extraordinarily hard to regulate it with these regulations, because, the noises are not necessarily blasting, but they're there and they dominate everything else because it's so quiet out. At nighttime, there's not that many cars on Western Ave, and it's really nice and quiet. That's when we have our peace and we sit out in the back and talk. And to have some kind of persistent noise there. Okay.
Seth, you can finish your statement, please.
Okay, and just to have some persistent noise basically takes away, the reason that I bought my backyard. And limiting the number of events would just solve that for me. Maybe it's not 2, but maybe it's 10 or 20, just so that I can at least have some weekends to myself. And I have a question. I have a statement from another neighbor that was not able to come. Can I read that to you all?
That's fine by me, yeah.
Okay.
Can you just tell us who the neighbor is?
Yep. This is Jeremy Vigneault. He lives one plot north of me on Western Ave. I would like to voice my opposition to the proposed zoning change as detailed in Article 20. While I'm a fan of local farms and what they bring to the community and beyond, I believe this proposed change will undermine community support and frankly backfire in its effort to shore up financial stability for local farms. Farms that want to host events tied to their core businesses are not what the zoning change seems to be about. Rather, this proposed change seems to be primarily focused toward parties and events hosted at a dual-use facility like the barn at Silverwood Farm. My wife and I are big fans of Silverwood Farm and the CSA that they used to offer. We enjoyed everything agriculturally related to the farm, even the daytime events that were hosted there, including gatherings for the Sherburne Yacht Club. This enthusiasm fades, however, when the events and parties turn into nighttime endeavors that include music, alcohol, and traffic. The prospect of late-night noise in summer months increased traffic and at night and safety concerns from alcohol, all potentially happening every weekend, might make buyers think twice about purchasing a home in a previously quiet residential or agricultural area. This prospect would make me less enthusiastic about any farm as a neighbor and create a concern for my property value. I request that the advisory board make a recommendation against the article.
Thank you, Seth. Any other public comments at the moment? Please just step right up.
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue. In 3.4.3A, delete during May through October, for the same reason I mentioned. It's needless words. It really doesn't do anything. Item 2, in 3.4.3B, change 75 to 60. I really can't believe that you're thinking you want it to be 75 decibels at the street. That's incredible. 60 is, as he says, a constant conversation. And so I'm proposing 60, which is obviously not favored by him. I think anything more than 60 for this location, any location where it's not in the center of town, is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, then adding, it is strongly encouraged that the town purchase a sound level meter with an NIST certification for use by the police department and zoning enforcement officer. And in paragraph 3.4.3b, add, the permit holder shall have a sound level meter with an NIST certification.
Thank you, Robert.
I'm greatly in favor of keeping paragraph C. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Please just. Thank you.
This is a better one than you could form a line if you care to.
You guys can form a line. If you care to speak, please just step right up.
Sorry, the same issues go where we just I don't think we really have a good sense on what that number should be. I'm 75, 85, and yes, we need to start with a number, but we're still struggling with, in the town center, that public right-of-way could be 75 feet. Is it 50 feet? Where is that public right-of-way? How far out is that distance? If we have a standard for a number of that sound, we should also have a standard of where that is measured at. To say the lot line, different lot lines are different on every farm. This is not applying to just one farm in town. It would apply to any farm in town. So that's why I'm really more in favor of having those numbers be in a chart that allows us to, we can do our best stab at setting numbers and setting distances, but we don't have it just yet. And so we might need to be able to change it, test it out. If this does pass, test it out in June and find, okay, planning board really needs to adjust these numbers and have some flexibility.
Thank you, Eddie. Jonathan?
Yeah, Jonathan Hudson Walker, 32 Pleasant Street. In the document I mentioned earlier, Support Sherborne's Agricultural Heritage, there was a section there discussing the events that were held last year at Silwood Organic Farm, because we'd heard from the initial planning board hearing that there were some complaints about events. And we had, I think, records are pulled from the police in connection with the second hearing. It turns out there were 4 complaints made to the police last year, all by Mr. Malloy here, who, and some of these we felt were borderline harassment. In 2 instances, I personally met the police on most of those occasions. We walked outside and the police officers, I don't know why I'm being brought here, I can't hear a thing. The frogs were louder than the noise coming out of the barn. So we feel that we've been respectful of the neighbors, we've controlled the noise, and we'll certainly aim to do that going forward as well.
And those are documented in police records somewhere that they've called. Thank you.
Right here.
Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Hudson Walker. I'm 32 Pleasant Street and owner of Silverwood Organic Farm. I could probably talk for about 5 hours, but I know I'm not allowed to, so I'll keep it to 5 minutes. But 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay. As Jonathan mentioned, 2 out of the 4 police reports that are on file said that there was no noise at the scene. Mr. Malloy read a statement from the Vinots, and the Vinots have been members of our farm, very good friends of our farmers and us. And I have letters here for every single year that they were a member of a farm. They wanted to come and have wine and cheese on our balcony. And so my thought on that is this to me sounds like a special recognition event. And if the Vinots, who also live on Western Avenue, would like to have this type of event on our property, why shouldn't all community members in Sherborne also? And I think that supports our warrant. This was one of the functions that the police were called to. It had about 15 girls, and it was my 8th grade girl's birthday party. No noise was reported. This was the teacher appreciation lunch that we had. This was event number 2 at our farm. We did not get a police report on this. This was broad daylight. We had 7 functions altogether. This was the Sherborne Yacht, our 3rd function on the farm. Probably, this was my daughter's graduation party from high school. We had a bouncy castle. We had ages 1 all the way up to 85. The police were called twice at this party. The first time they were called, they said the bullfrogs sounded louder than the music. We completely turned the music off. And the second time they were called, no noise was reported. So I just feel that, oh, and then we had 2 pediatric cardiologists from Sherborne who live on Farm Street, good friends of ours, had a very small wedding. This was the wedding, and they have 5 small children between them. Small wedding, and the police were called at this. They did turn the music off. Probably the loudest party we had in November was for the raise funds for the Sherborne Library. Police detail was there, and in our barn present at the time. That was probably the loudest one. We did have a band who is from Sherborne in the barn at that time. So I think they're overstated. Jonathan and I have every single intention to make friends with the neighbors, make sure that the neighbors have our cell phone numbers, to please call us in advance. We've never heard from a single one of our neighbors that there was a problem with noise, but we'll absolutely do everything that we can to put in any sort of contract that, you know, we'll be keeping our noise to a minimum and hopefully being as unobtrusive to the neighbors as possible.
Thank you, Lisa. George?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate kind of what I said on the last article about being a pro-business article, and this especially for the agricultural businesses in our town, which are vital. And one of the main reasons, I mean, I moved here, I grew up on a farm in upstate New York and studied agricultural economics, and I know farms really need additional income sources, and to have a beautiful barn like Silverwood has, or other facilities that other farms in town have, to be able to utilize them for additional income, I think is vital for them to survive and keep Sherborne the way it is now. And so I'm very much in favor of this article.
Thank you, George. Any other public comment? Seth, is there a rebuttal? Again, I'll just reiterate, if you're going to say something that's already been said, no need. If you're going to comment back to what was brought up, please.
Yep. Seth Malloy, 176 Western Ave. I'd just first like to say that, you know, there's no motivation to make things up. 3 abutters have spoken at different events about hearing significant noise on their property. The nature of the event is not relevant. If it's amplified sound, it comes to your house. It doesn't matter, you know, really what the nature of the event is. And all of the complaints were made after 9:30. It was pointed out at the last meeting. And you know, I was thinking about this because it's funny. We have very different perspectives, and how it was presented as, you know, the events are very nice, and they probably were. And I was standing in my front yard with a friend of mine, and his dog ran over into our neighbor's yard, and he yelled at the dog and clapped. And I suddenly was realizing it's echoing like crazy. You know, I don't usually yell in my front yard. And I think one of the problems is the acoustics in the area are just very, they're very unfriendly for noise transmission. You know, if you've ever been in one of those elliptical things where 2 people stand at the 2 points and you can almost hear someone whisper. And I think there's that kind of situation that's going on where, you know, we're in our backyard like, wow, they must have a gigantic rave going on. You know, it's kind of, you have that split screen with, you know, Mozart being played over here and then, you know, Led Zeppelin being played over here. I think that's kind of what maybe the situation is, which goes back to, you know, how difficult these things are to really, to monitor and to figure out if there is too much noise or what the decibel limit is. I think it's just really difficult. And, you know, we have had a lot of patience and trying, you know, maybe it's just a couple times, but it is heard very clearly at our place. And it might not be that our neighbors have it unreasonably loud. It might just be that it is kind of uncannily comes across the meadow. So I think that for these reasons, I would love to, if someone stood up and said, we're limiting this to 10, 15, 15 events per year, I would be all for it and I would vote for it. But it's just that it's all every weekend. And to support that, a friend of mine was trying to book a wedding up at Gibbet Hill Farm. I think it's in Acton or somewhere up the northwest. There's a 2-year wait list for an event on the weekend. 2 years. That means that if weddings go well, it's not that unlikely that that's what's going to happen. And, you know, I know that, you know, we've heard farmers are busy, but you can hire out other people to do that kind of thing because it's a great source of revenue, you know. Like we heard, it's low impact and everything else. So I think the likelihood of it being that regular is very real. And, you know, the sound does travel and it does bother.
Thank you, Seth. May I ask a question as a audio neophyte? Have you ever tried to put the speakers out by your pond facing back towards the barn? Would that change the sound dynamics? Don't need an answer here, I'm just wondering, just guessing, okay, thank you, please.
Hello. I'm Laura Rainey, 89 Arch Street, Holliston, Mass., graduate of Dover-Sherburne High School. This is my 7th year employed at Silverwood Organic Farm, and I have watched our owners, Lisa and Jonathan, host charity events to which they have spent money from their own pockets and time from their busy lives to host such events. Organic farming has become a passion of mine through my time employed at the farm. Over the years, we have provided organic vegetables to local families, grocers and restaurants, hospitals, and most recently the school systems, Franklin Public Schools and actually the Dover-Sherburne as of last year. But with each year comes challenges in generating profits. And to have, I think of it as like a security net where revenue may be generated through respectful and celebratory functions would be beneficial on so many levels. I value my employment at the farm, and to know that conditions beyond my control that affect profits, such as like weather, deer population, pests, and everything, could be offset by a graduation party or an anniversary or other such event, would be so settling to me as an employee. And just, I guess, in the time I've known Lisa and Jonathan, they are probably two of the most like family orientated and just like ethical and stand-up people, and family is their absolute #1 priority. And so I can't imagine them allowing events to occur without respecting whatever regulations and everything that the boards or committees have, and things that would ever, put in jeopardy their family, or just even respect for their neighbors. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard?
Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street, Hopestill Farm. I appreciate the sentiment in this article, and more or less I support it. However, I think the issue that gnaws both here and also the one about the business district is the issue of control and lack of control on the part of abutters. And I think that the decision to have an essentially unlimited number, or a rather large number, certainly going from a very small number to a very large number of events, is a significant loss of control for abutters. And I think that probably should be addressed in a bylaw, at least during the first year or the first couple of years, just to see how these things play out. I know that it's a good idea to write laws that are comprehensive and consider all kinds of possibilities and eventualities, so you don't have to keep coming back and tweaking it. I think this is one case where, in fact, starting low and going slow would be a benefit to the town as a whole. I strongly urge that, I don't know what that number is, but I strongly urge that a number be set for the number of events with outdoor amplified sound.
Thanks, Richard. Sarah?
Sarah O'Connell, 101 Farm Road. I have done a lot of events at the farm. We've always had a permit. We've always had a police officer. I've never, knock on wood, witnessed anyone leaving drunk, driving drunk. That's, the responsibility of the citizen of the town. Every time I have asked for something from this family, and I'm sorry I wasn't here last Thursday, but every time I've asked for an event for DSCF, for the library, for the PTO, for the teachers, they have never once said no. They're not out to make life really loud for everyone. They're here to give back. And the way they give back to the community, and the way that we can build the library, and the way that we can, sustain our schools because we have these unbelievable teachers, is because we respect them and we give them, these great luncheons or parties. And people love to to come to that one barn. And that's where that's our, we have a community center, but this is also really more of a community center for our town. I live on Farm Road, and there are people across the pond, literally across the pond, that have parties and they echo off, and I can hear everything. I mean, and it's band, and it's great. But if you get mad every time your neighbor's playing the radio, I mean, that's just, I don't know. It just seems like what they're doing is for you, is for the town. And I just feel like you can't you can't limit it. You can limit it, but I think that would be a huge disservice.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, I'd just like a clarification that this is not for one farm. This is for any farm in Sherborne. So we have no idea who the owners might be or and what their intentions might be. So.
Are there any other public comment? Please, again, just to reiterate, if it's something you've already said, no need, but.
So it seems like the issue here is we're trying to do something good for the town and bring more events in. And on the other hand, we're imagining worst case scenarios of every weekend essentially being ruined, people partying over, people driving drunk and throwing their cans onto our yard, and having like lots of people at once, it being loud, and I'm hearing all summer long. There are not that many weekends in the summer. When you're proposing 10 weekend limit, 10 event limit, it's actually pretty much the whole summer. So I agree with starting small and seeing how it goes. Maybe it's just going to be fine. Maybe it's 50 people events and nothing really happens, and we kind of learn to live with it, and it's going to be wonderful. Maybe my daughter one day will even go to the wedding at Silverwood Farm. But we really need to have laws to prevent worst case scenarios where it's going to become not enjoyable, and we will lose a portion of our land, of our life here, to pretty much a business. It's not going to be farm, it's going to be a venue, it's going to be hospitality. And this is something where I'm asking to strike a little balance of saying, let's put something in place to not encourage pretty much predatory venue-like practices, and have more things along the lines like what you got the fox hunt a few years ago, or like little events during the daylight, maybe even corporate retreats during the day where one bus comes in, but not at night. 200 people, drunking, yelling, I don't know, urinating all over the place. So this is what I don't want to happen. So I'm asking for 2 alcohol serving event limit to start with, and it can always be changed upwards at next year and seeing how it goes.
Thank you.
So the reason I oppose the idea of limits is because then it puts a farmer in a position of deciding only doing events that are the most profitable to the farm. And as John Higley said, there were some disagreements by some of the other farmers in town saying that they don't need this permit because it's already something that they are entitled to do as the right to farm, and it counts as agritourism according to the state. And of course, we've had a lot of discussions about why that's a gray area. So I would like to think that these events encompass everything from a family in town saying, gee, it's Thanksgiving and we need a space to have all of our family to do a Thanksgiving dinner, and we don't want to go to a restaurant, we want to make our own food. Well, perhaps that's a place where they could have a potluck and gather their family. We don't have a lot of spaces in town for gatherings, and by setting a limit, then you're saying, okay, there's a priority of types of events. Not every event is going to be a wedding. It's probably going to be very, the practicalities of hosting a wedding and setting up for a wedding and all would probably limit it to maybe one a weekend, if that. But we don't want to limit events because events are broad. They can be a small gathering, they could be a big gathering, so.
Though I will just say, Addie, per the police reports and what we've heard today, that even a small gathering of children can cause a noise issue for the abutters, apparently, so, duly noted. I'm going to close off for public comment at the moment and take it up here for advisory, for any discussion internally here. Comments, questions, concerns?
Mr. Chairman, one comment. I want to recognize and applaud the judicious approach of the planning board to balance in all of these articles, and this one in particular, the rural characteristic of Sherburne, the agrarian characteristic, with the necessary growth. And again, many of these that we've spoken about and will speak about focus on developments. But this one in particular wants to preserve farms. And we focused on Silverwood, which is an excellent example of a working farm that could benefit from this. But wouldn't it be great if someone bought a farm and started farming because of this? And so the proliferation of farming is an option also that this would allow the added revenue to those farmers to supplement, as the employee mentioned. And so we're preserving that agrarian characteristic while balancing growth.
Thank you. Anyone else? Jeff, Stephen? Ben?
I support this. I mean, Lisa and Jonathan have been very generous with that, making their facility available at no cost to organizations all around town. They helped us to have an event to rebuild the playground. So I think it is, as George said, it's a step in the right direction. So to help them subsidize their business, because I've worked for somebody who owned a farm, and that's how we made a profit on the farm, was hosting. It was a big farm, so much bigger events, but for that short duration of the event versus the longevity of the farm. So you have to balance those two.
Stephen, Jeff, Ben?
Well, I'd be a little bit confused if the reason for supporting this is because of free events while we're trying to open up a new profit-making factor for the farms. I just say again that this has to be a rule for all farms, not just for the one. I think it's in general a good idea, but I do hear the concerns about unlimited numbers of events.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'll second that more firmly. To say that this vote is a no-brainer is false. We've got 3 or 4 people here and one absentee citizen who are opposed to this because they live in a residential zone and they don't want to have large events. Article 19 was in the Business Central District. So I feel that we do need to strike a balance. Richard's far more eloquent than I could ever be, but I believe that we can start off slow and then allow it to grow. As noted by a couple people who spoke, some of the wedding venues are having 4 to 5 weddings a week, okay? So if this article does not have a limit on the number of events per year per each venue, then I'll oppose it, and I'll write a minority opinion opposing it if the advisory committee votes in favor of it. Now, I will say I think 2 per year is ridiculously low, maybe something like 1 or possibly 2 a month. But if there is no limit in there, then I'm opposed.
Thank you, Jeff. Hang on 1 second. Is there any other comments up front here? No? Then I'll open it back up to public comment, and I'll just reiterate, if no need to say what's been said. We've been discussing this for a while now. I trust this will be unique.
This is the unique. The straw that breaks the camel's back, or whatever, or the Gordian knot, I think it is. But what I was going to suggest is that rather than limiting the number of events, we limit the number of events that have amplified music, and that would be a compromise that wouldn't curtail the ability of the farm to do a lot of the things they do that are not noise intensive, but maybe find a limit on the noise the true amplified noise producing events.
As promised, a unique take. Thank you. Please, Robert, then Lisa.
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue. If you're going to put a limit on the number of events, I think it is entirely logical also to put a reasonable limit on what the sound is at the adjacent property, and that is certainly no more than 60.
Thank you, Robert. Lisa, would you care to make another?
Hi, Lisa Hudson-Walker, 32 Pleasant Street. I just want to make it very clear, this is our secondary source of income. We're a farm. We sell to 4 Whole Foods in Bellingham, Wellesley, Framingham. We sell to Brothers Markets, et cetera. We're not holding weddings on a Tuesday night. Our farmers are coming in and covered in dirt, completely messing up the barn, our working barn. So every year, Jonathan and I are faced with whether we keep this farm going or not. Every single year, we've invested our own money on this farm to keep it going. We're not making a profit. We would like to just cover our operating expenses at this point. We'd like to keep people like Laura employed. We'd like to keep people like Abel employed. We'd like to give high school students in Dover-Sherburne a chance to volunteer on our farm, to do their senior projects on our farm. We have probably about 4 or 5 people also from Dover-Sherburne who've graduated from the high school that work at our farm. So it's very much a local working farm, and this is our secondary source of income to help us cover operating expenses. I'd love to say yes to, the DSCF, or yes to the library fundraising, and yes to raising funds to build a playground, as well as saying yes to, we got a letter from someone on Western Avenue as well who would like to hold their wedding on our farm. I'd love to say yes to them. So I'm concerned, as Addie May said, about limiting the number in that we're going to only be saying yes to large weddings, or things that would bring in a lot of profit, where I'd like to say yes to the couple who lives on Western Avenue who wants to have a small wedding at our farm. I think also, just once we get permitted, there are going to be limitations. Our barn doesn't hold 200 people, so that in of itself is going to limit. We're not going to have 200 people at our farm. Our barn does not hold that many. So I think there's going to be a lot of limits when it comes to our barn being permitted for these type of events, if it gets to that point. Okay, thank you.
Lisa. George, please.
No, just say whenever they're done.
Yep.
So one thing I wanted to respond to Marion, not amplified music, but just sound, because trumpets are really loud too. And I had a question about the specific, but I forgot what it was. But I have a couple notes. I question whether this will really support. One of the things that I'm concerned about also, because I really do like farms, is that it supports farming going forward, not in the next couple of years, but 10, 20 years. And I think Jeremy mentioned the same thing. If farm starts to equal event venue, a lot of people are going to have a different opinion about farms in their town. If there's another property, the Bronze, that's an old farm. If it comes up and someone wants to build another event venue there, which equals farm as the years progress, it could be the case that we end up. It could end up backfiring in that farms are just associated with events, a great way to do events, and less people will support it. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something to keep into consideration. And my great-grandfather was a farmer up in Milford, New Hampshire, and for a long time, farming has been a hard business. And he used to do all kinds of stuff to try to make money. He used to have beehives, he had a bunch of chicken houses, he had the regular produce. He had horses. He would take the horses down to Boston some weekends and get fish and go back. There's a lot of other ways that are agriculturally focused. And maybe this one is encouraging our farms to kind of say, well, let's just move away from agriculture because maybe it's a higher profit margin and easier. So I think events is kind of the last thing I would associate with loud kind of wedding events is the least agricultural thing that maybe one could do.
Thank you. Guys, I'm going to close off the public comment now, and I will kick it over to the Board of Selectmen. I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys.
Well, first I want to make a motion to recommend this article.
Second.
But mainly, I think Addie made a fantastic point with the limiting of events. You don't want to limit it so the charitable organizations that have taken such great advantage of it are then not allowed to do it. I also wanted to point out from the Board of Selectmen, the overwhelming amount of letters of support that we've received over the last week in regards to this article, and the wonderful comments they've made about Silverwood and other farms, and one being a neighbor that's directly behind, and she said there's been, they live right next to it, and they've never been disturbed by the noise. So I think this is, this article is good for the farm business in this town, and it, even as Peter said, it could encourage more, a way a farm can continue to survive. I think this is a great thing.
I would add that I think it's incumbent upon us as a Board of Selectmen and incumbent upon advisory and the community to support farms. And it is very hard to make a living out of farming, particularly in a suburban, high-tax environment. We need to do everything we can to support them. And I would make the further point, for those who are worried about the potential noise, if the farm fails and becomes a residential development packed with people, the amount of noise is going to far exceed anything that's going to happen from these events. To the extent that there is always that risk out there, I know where I'm located, I get letters all the time from people wanting to buy where I'm at to put housing. So I imagine that this farm is getting letters too, that there are a lot of developers out there who would love to have a nice sizable piece of land, put a lot of housing in there, and then all those people who are listening to the birds chirp will suddenly have crowds, people, noise, all the things that go with having a lot of neighbors packed in. So I very much want to support this article.
And I would say, I would reiterate, I think this is a great thing for the town to have this opportunity. I also think that the fact that this is not a by right proposition, it's by right in terms of being allowed to do it as an accessory use to a farm. It's not if it becomes a principal use, then it's not legal. So if it became a predominant use, or it wasn't incidental to the fact that this is a property that's used for farming and the event is somehow related to or taking advantage of the farming location, then it's not going to be allowed. And the second thing is the planning board can put conditions. It can put conditions in terms of the number of events if it wants to, if it thinks it's the right thing to do. It could put conditions on Silverwood Farm and not put them on some other farm that comes in, or vice versa. So there are opportunities for abutters who have legitimate concerns about noise or numbers of events or traffic or anything else to show up and be heard and make a persuasive case that the permit should be limited or should be limited for an initial period of time. I don't think we need to do that in the bylaw itself. Again, I think, let's not clutter this up. We're trying to do something that's a good thing that creates some positive change for the town. Let the details be worked out in the site plan review process. And I guess we have a motion on the table, so all in favor of that motion to support. Okay.
Thank you, guys. So that's back up to us. Can I get a motion for favorable action on this Article 20?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion up here? Jeff, I heard you loud and clear on the idea of limitations. I also heard what Mike said about planning board having the ability to do some limitations on a per event basis, on a per farm basis. Though I get it, and I would not like to see unlimited events. I have a hard time picturing, 7 nights a week ragers happening at Silverwood Organic Farm. Maybe the Hudson Walkers have a different plan than what I'm expecting, but I find that to be unlikely. And I think it unlikely, and I don't think the planning board would allow for that to happen at any of the farms in town.
Well, another point is, they live there too. That's their primary residence, and that barn is right behind their house, so, and they have small children, so it's unlikely that they're gonna have 400 people at a
This isn't about
wedding.
one farm. Let's just talk about the regulation.
I agree, but we've been spending a lot of time on Silverwood, so the point is that they do live there, and others live there, or at their farms as well, so.
Not necessarily.
I say leave the regulation up to the planning board and their site visit and their site review for each, on a permit by permit basis. And again, like Mike said, leave the details to those that are close to it, so, and leave it without limitations in the article itself.
As far as I know, nobody lives at, what is it, Sweet Meadow Farm, for example. And to me, that, I don't have direct knowledge, but I've heard that there have been times when they were a bad neighbor. So, I don't, for the, what would be the process if, you know, can a permit be revised? You know, if it appears that it's being abused?
Yes.
It can be enforced against. I'm just looking to see if there's any kind of limitation on term in here. I guess there's not. Doesn't look like there is.
And the events are is it just any events with alcohol that would need an individual permit? Is that right, Bill?
That's from the
From the Board
Board
of Selectmen, for alcohol service, you would have to have a one-day liquor license, or their caterer would have to have a one-day liquor license to serve.
And there is a limit as to the number of one-day liquor licenses we can give the same place before the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission says they need to have a regular liquor license.
Okay.
Do you know what that limit is, by any chance?
Not offhand.
I'll get stumped. Huh? Anything else up here? Okay, so there's a motion on the table for favorable action. All those in favor? I guess we're at 6, and all those opposed? 6-1. Okay. Okay, thank you all for Article 20. We're going to move on.
Wait, what was the vote on that?
It was 6-1 for them.
Next up, we're on to Article 21.
6-1 what?
Zoning.
6-1 in favor for advisory.
Photovoltaic facilities. Hashtag solar farms. John.
John Higley, Saddlebrook Road, Chairman of the Planning Board. This was also brought to the Planning Board, and we thought it was a worthy article to go to the town. We have a large-scale solar zoning bylaw now, and the town voted for it as part of our campaign to become a green community, which we are. And we followed the state recommendations for solar, which included a solar photovoltaic overlay district. So we have that. This is a case where the state says you can't turn down a solar installation in town, in your community, unless. So and so with large scale, the state says you can't turn it down, but you can decide where. So the state recommendation is to prioritize rooftop, and then disturbed land or locations that, like a paved area, and it's a last resort, consider putting a solar installation on ground mounted. So we worked hard on this. We already have a overlay district. It's our overlay district is on disturbed land. It's on the transfer station the landfill. So we've done that. We comply. That's a recommended way by the state to enable large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic facilities. So we already have that. Now, this is proposing to, in addition to that, to enable large-scale installation at different locations in town. So we wrote in things like 500 feet from any residence other than the property owner. We wrote in terms that you see in the warrant article. And then during the hearing process, we talked about this before, but during the hearing process, we really, with the input of a lot of people for and against, we really struggled. One point was no more than 10% of the facility should be located on land that's actively farmed or has been woodland within 5 years. That's language, that goal is in compliance with the state recommendation. if you're going to put in a large-scale system, really your last resort is to cut down good woodland. Woodland is part of our ecology. It's a good thing. And as a last resort, put it on good farmland. So we tried to come up with language to limit it. We went back and forth during the planning board hearing, and as a result, we decided we can't resolve this. So we decided to not recommend, we voted unanimously to not recommend this article because we really want to protect good woodland. We really want to protect good farmland. That's certainly in our long-term vision for the town. And while a large-scale system can be removed, the site can be restored, it does have an impact on the ecology, but it's a potentially a 30-year change to some property. It also might create an incentive to cut down woodland because you've got to wait 5 years. So cut it down, and that's the opposite of what we want to do. So as a result, we went around and around this. Right now, a farm, for instance, can put in a large-scale system as long as not more than 125% of the output. It can have 125% of its own needs. In other words, they can put in a large-scale system as long as they're using most of it, and if there's excess, it can't be more than 125% of their needs. So a farm can put in a solar system now as long as they're going to use most of the output. This was designed specifically for revenue generation, and as I said, we went around and around, decided we really can't resolve. That's why the state put in a recommendation to create an overlay district, so that you're not trying to find locations all around town and having incentive to use good farmland and good woodland. So we felt like we opened up a can of worms as we went around. As I say, a lot of people had a lot of input, and we decided we've done the right thing with the overlay district, and this is trying to add to that in a way that would provide incentive to cut woodlands and farmland, which we don't want. So we recommended against it.
We're open for public comment, please, Robert.
Robert Johnson, 272 Western Avenue, and I'm the one that started this mess. Sorry about that. If you do not want solar farm on farmland or woodland, do not propose any article. And so they have withdrawn it where they don't want it on farmland or woodland, then forget it. And so don't waste our time. Vote it down.
Are there any other public comments? Is there any public comments at the moment? I'm not going to kick it over to you.
I would suggest we follow the advice of our planning
I
board.
think that's probably correct. All right, I'm going to close the public comments for the moment and advisory. Do we have any comments?
I concur with Mike's statement.
And so procedurally,
We take no action.
Motion to take no action.
we're going to vote to take no action. Okay. Comments?
You let the selectmen?
Yeah, no, I'm going to let them. But
No.
formally,
Yes, it's
we're going to
vote.
open it back up to public comment. Anyone? No? Okay. Gentlemen, do you care to comment?
Make a motion that we recommend no action.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
So back up here to advisory. I will take a motion to take no action.
The only thing I'll say is that whoever was assigned to write this one up has to get assigned another article.
So do I have a motion to take no action on Article 21?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor of no action? There we go, 7-0. Thank you all. Okay. I think we are at last up, is that correct? Could that be? Could we be coming to the close of this public hearing?
You are correct, sir.
Okay. Here we go. Article 22, zoning and open space development.
Right. Article 22 is one of really a series of zoning bylaws that the planning board is putting forth to bring our bylaws in line with the goals of the general plan, including guiding housing development, protection of natural resources, especially groundwater and forests, and including the financial sustainability of the town. So our current subdivision situation is this. The town has over 20 properties of 20 acres or more that could potentially be subdivisions that don't have permanent protection, and another 20 or so of between 10 and 20 acres. So we are very vulnerable to subdivision developments, even though we haven't had many of them, almost none of them, since the 70s when there was a big boom in them. But I think with the development pressures that are present today, we can expect that some of these large properties will be subdivisions. Currently, subdivisions, conventional subdivisions are permitted by right, both by the town and by the state. That's where a large property is divided into 1 or 2 or 3 acre lots, depending on the zoning district. And this is what is generally known now as suburban sprawl, because it increases pavement, it increases lawns, it causes fragmentation of natural spaces. And the natural open space, whether people are for or against adding more protected open space to the town, the loss of this open space has practical consequences for everyone, because it reduces our ability to recharge our groundwater, and it reduces our ability to control the climate, especially in the face of global climate change. Sherburne is cooler than the surrounding neighborhoods for a reason. We have forest. So in 1996, Section 4.5 was added to the zoning bylaws in an effort to try to control subdivisions, but it was a baby step in that direction because it still required an acre per house. That's not true cluster subdivisions as it's understood today. And the state and environmental organizations have done a lot in recent years to define open space design, open space subdivision design. It's also called low impact development, has less impact on the environment, and cluster development. You've probably heard that before. So Sherburne was assisted in revising our subdivision bylaw, our Section 4.5 open space subdivision bylaw, by an expert from Mass Audubon, who was funded by the state to do this. So we came up with a revised new Section 4.5. We struck the entire 4.5 as it is and wrote the entire new section that you see. It's rather long. So in summary, it allows open space design subdivision by right. The previous open space subdivision law that we had required a special permit, and that was a disincentive. So we're hoping that by right will make it much more of an incentive. It should be noted that in the original version of the bylaw, we neglected to realize that the state requires conventional subdivisions by right. So we cannot, according to legal counsel, our legal counsel, we cannot require a special permit of a conventional subdivision. So the best we can do for now is to allow us open space design subdivision by right. So what's the difference from the old one? Well, now we're preserving at least 60% of the land as open space, 40% for the houses. The number of houses that'll be in that 40% is limited by a couple of formulae, which you can read in your warrant. Basically, either you calculate the number of houses that could have gone there in a conventional subdivision and put them clustered on the 40% land, or you use a formula that's detailed there, deciding how much open space, valuable open space you have to deduct before making your calculation of houses. In any case, housing number will be limited. The lots will generally be privately owned. It's a subdivision, after all, by a homeowners association or a condo association. And all the other Concom and Board of Health regulations, of course, will apply. We've discussed this with Board of Health. They are actively looking at their regulations to see how they can be adapted to this sort of subdivision that they're in favor of. We've tried to close loopholes like you can't put all the wetlands in the 60% open space. You have to make it wetlands equally distributed. The open space can be in separate parts of the parcel because every parcel is different, but they have to be connected either by a greenway to each other or to adjacent conservation land to keep it in the spirit of environmental protection. So the question is, will it be used? The incentive, we're hoping the incentive of having it by right will help its use, but also open space subdivisions have been shown to be lower impact on the developer as well as the land because the amount of pavement, the amount of infrastructure is smaller and the infrastructure is more concentrated. So costs can be quite a bit less. Another incentive is that the planning board will facilitate this kind of subdivision. And there could be in the future sales and price advantages because there are trends in housing preferences these days where pocket neighborhoods with closer houses with guaranteed open space shared have become more popular. So this could be economically wise for both the developer and the town. It allows us to allow some development, of course, we can't control. It allows us to guide that development that we can't control and still assure future tax revenues to the town and preserve open space as best we can.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, we're open for public comment on this one.
Okay.
How does this work?
I think. Do you have your copy? Yeah. Just the planning board hearing, we talked about some changes to the warrant article, so I just wanted to review that. Yeah. So am I looking? Yeah, here it is. Okay, so I'll just review the changes. The changes were because we got advice from council that we had to make both standard subdivision and this open space version by right. So we made some changes. Under, I think it's on the first page. I guess, is this the actual warrant article?
Yeah. It's,
so page 6 of.
No, it's actually on the warrant article. It's under.
It's under the applicability section. If you find that after definitions, next is applicability A.
A, yep.
So in A, the first sentence ends with RA, RB, and RC districts. So we struck the rest of that section where it says all housing developments.
All the way down to the bottom?
All the way to the bottom. And we struck it just for that reason, just so that they're both by right. Then the next change, which is in yield allowable residential units section. I don't know.
Same page.
Same page.
Oh, same page, but continue. There's section A, section B, net calculation. Oh, yeah, so there's you see net acreage calculation?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, that paragraph is followed by A, B, and C.
Yes.
In B, in the middle of it, it says 100-year floodplains as most recently delineated by FEMA, Zone 1 and A, around public, and we inserted and private water well supplies. So we added and private. So it covers public and private water well supplies.
All water supplies, yeah.
Yeah. And then the next change is in the open space requirements. So about a full page ahead, you'll see open space requirements in the paragraph that begins with minimum.
See it? They're in there?
Yeah, about halfway through, it says said land may be utilized for common water supply wells and associated infrastructure, common subsurface. We struck the word common both times. So it just says utilized for water supply wells and associated infrastructure, subsurface leaching fields. So we struck the word common. And I think that may be. And that's it. No other changes.
Thank you, John. Any public comments? Mr. Durensis.
I've seen these types of bylaws work quite well in other communities. It does, if done right, it does allow sort of a neighborhood, the creation of a neighborhood, yet preserves the feel of open space. So to some extent, they're perfect for a town like Sherburne, because we want to preserve the open space, the sense of rural character, but it also has the houses clustered together in a way that they can actually interact with each other and their kids can play and so on. So it has a lot of community building advantages that I've seen in other towns. So I support this and recommend that you all support it too.
Steve?
Yes, please.
Thanks. I support this also. I had a couple of questions, just sort of technical questions for Marion or somebody. I like this provision that open space design may be applied to non-contiguous parcels, and that's a good creative way to increase density and preserve open space. This says the may be determined on 2 or more separate parcels, and the calculated number of units may be D. I'm on D of page 7.
It's in the applicability section.
Yeah, the numbering on this is a little weird too, but so it's broken up by headings rather than by section numbers.
So you're in applicability D, is that correct?
I'm on I'm on applicability D, right. Open space design may be applied to non-contiguous parcels. That is, the total maximum number of residential units determined according to the requirements of the following section may be determined on 2 or more separate parcels. The calculated number of units may be applied to a single parcel while the open space requirement is met on a separate parcel, provided that the separate parcel would otherwise be able to accommodate the building lots allowed. That's a little unclear, because I think what you mean is the building lots that would be allowed on the open space parcel alone. You're not talking about all the building lots allowed.
On the open space parcel alone, that's right.
Yeah, but there might need to be some clarity there. I
agree.
I think we know what you mean, but it just
The spirit of it is you can't put all the open space wetland in one part. It has to be a buildable piece of
that you've
land.
taken out off the market, basically. And then a sort of a related point under C, right above that, you talk about consolidating density bonuses, transfer development rights, or other special permits. But are you considering D to be a transfer of development rights or not? In other words, do you envision that somebody needs a transfer of development rights permit in order to do what D says you can do under this bylaw by right, or not?
You know, I have completely lost D here, but I know what you're talking about.
So it's page 7, Marion, on at least the version
thank
I've
you.
got.
That's the handout. That's page 7 on the handout.
Yeah, the
Oh, here we
handout.
go.
Not the one.
She's got it.
Yeah, she's got it. So you're consolidating all these proceedings, including transfer of development rights, which is a special permit process, right? And then in D, you're talking about what effectively is a transfer of development rights by saying you can use multiple parcels, but
That
transfer
is
the
a
development rights to the other parcel. You've said you can do that by right, as far as this being a open space development by right, but you're also citing to the transfer development rights provision, which is a special permit, so
That's
which is
right.
it?
That's right. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We decided not to make a whole section on transfer of development rights here, because transfer of development rights is a whole
Yeah, you don't
zoning
have to, you
issue
don't have
on
to do
its
that
own.
in here, I agree with that.
But yes, transfer of development rights would, will it or will it not require a special permit under these conditions?
That's the question,
Is the
yeah.
question. And I do not know.
Okay.
Maybe I'll refer to John, maybe he knows.
No, I have my binder, I didn't drop it after all. So in C, it says transfer of development rights and/or other uses that requires a special permit, a site plan review, and/or other use that requires a special permit or site plan review. So it says all such special permits and the site plan review. So C is what we're trying to enable, the language there. If D is in conflict with that, we want to be able to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's not, I don't think it's in conflict, John, but C is a procedural question. It says we're going to consolidate all the proceedings in one hearing
Right.
for all the relief you need to do your development. And one of the things it notes is that there's a transfer development rights special permit requirement in town. So if you needed that, you'd have to consolidate that. You'd have to apply for it, and it would all be heard in the same hearing.
Right.
Open space design, which is the by right proceeding that you've created here, also has an element under D, which is a transfer of development rights provision. It doesn't call it that, but it accomplishes the same thing. It does exactly what a transfer of development rights provision would do, because it lets you say to somebody, I'm going to buy your lot for the purpose of not developing it, so I get more yield on the other lot.
Right.
So would it be a remedy to say open space design, in D, open space design may be applied to non-contiguous parcels by special permit?
If that's what you want.
I think it probably is what we want,
Okay.
but
That's a material change. You've gone from as of right to a special permit.
Well, just if you're going to do it through multiple lots.
So
not
I think there's some, so the intent is, there's transfer of development rights where you have a parcel of land that's maybe not part of this development and it's on another part of town and it's sold. The right to preserve that parcel it's sold to, visually, it doesn't look like it's part of this parcel. I think C, we're only allowing as part of this by right process, the concept of transfer of development rights within, when you're subdividing the house lots within one single subdivision.
That's not what D says, Patty May.
But,
Two or more separate parcels.
two or more separate parcels.
but
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say as a planning board member, if somebody wants to apply this to two separate parcels, it perhaps should become a special permit.
All right, well, we have a process in our zoning to do that, so then what you'd want to do here in D, I think, is reference that process and make sure that process doesn't have any, baggage on it that's going to make it harder to do what you're trying to accomplish with this. And I don't offhand know what that process says because nobody's ever used it.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
We decided not to go there and get into this other section.
Right. Okay, anyway, but I mean, those are technical issues that I think could be worked out by town meeting with some minor language changes. I think overall, this is another good step forward for the town.
And so I apologize if I didn't ask this in the beginning, but what exactly is by right mean? So it sounded like from your description, we can pass this law, but it's not forcing anyone to do anything. We're encouraging someone, a developer, to do this, right? But they can or cannot do this anyways, right?
No, now they would need a special permit to do this, Steve, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's what the by right means.
As of right means that they can choose to go that way. They're not required to do any development at all, but if they're going to take advantage of it, they have it as of right. There's no requirement for a special permit. A special permit is not as of right. That means you have to ask permission and get approval to do.
Right.
So that two different concepts. As of right, you don't need a special permit. Special permit, you're not as of right.
So if I own 10 acres now, Steve, and I wanted to do a subdivision, I could either meet all the zoning standards and have lots that are all 1 acre each in the 1 acre zone and do that by right, or it could go to the planning board to get a special permit and cluster all the lots on one half of the property and have all the open space on the other half of the property. And what they're doing is saying that second thing, that cluster thing, you don't need a special permit for it
If you're gonna
anymore.
follow-
You can do
got
it by right.
Thank you.
What was actually recommended was that the cluster development be by right and conventional development be by special permit. And other towns have done this. And I sallied forth thinking, oh, we can do that too, but town council opined that we couldn't legally defend that in the face of the state law that allows conventional subdivisions by right. But we're going to look into it.
I think Lexington may have something going on about that right now, I think. Because they do have a provision like that.
I'll say that we start, the language that we put in the warrant article follows the state recommended model. And so we use the state recommended model, and then our town council said, you probably shouldn't. So that's why we've made this change to the warrant article language.
Are there any other public comments? If not, I'm going to take it up here. As usual, questions, comments, concerns up here at advisory?
So then I have a question. You said that there are other towns where their bylaw says that by right you can only do this and you need a special permit for conventional subdivision. So our town council is essentially saying that those towns are not actually in conformance with the state law?
If someone wants to challenge them, they're at risk of losing that down.
I see. Because I am in favor of this concept. I think that it's promotes the type of housing that we want to see in town. I think it promotes, the goals of the housing production plan. I was a little bit dismayed to hear that change was made because I think that it sort of cuts the legs off of this, or cuts one leg off at least. Because my assumption would be if you've got a 20-acre parcel that it's probably more profitable to divide it into 10 2-acre lots and you could build a 5-bedroom house on each one compared to a cluster where presumably you're not going to be building such large houses. And even though I think that is our goal as a town, is to have more mid-sized, moderate-priced housing, but as a developer, I would assume that in the current market, it's probably better, you're probably better off building as many big houses on medium, large lots as possible.
Yeah, so there are short-term and long-term incentives for Sherburne and for a developer. In the short term, a low-impact development means everything's closer together, there's less infrastructure cost. Developers like that. So this makes it easy to do that. So they have an incentive, it does reduce their manufacturing cost of the development. In the long term, the value of the house, more and more, particularly when we say, where do we want to be in 30 years? It's easy to go look at some other towns where they're already there, and they really don't have a lot of open space left. So the value of this is going up because you're in a nice house in a low-impact development community with conservation land. Abutting conservation land is a big value in the short term of the property, and in the long term, it makes, if the more Sherburne can preserve open space, the long-term value of Sherburne is the way we value it now. 30 years from now, we'll still have a lot of that. So this has a long-term value to the buyer, has a value to the developer. So I think in the long run, financially, we're ahead better. The property values of a house abutting conservation land goes up, and it'll go up more. And so I think there is incentives. It's not as nice as being able to say a standard subdivision is really difficult, but also any developer looking at this will know Sherburne really has we offer both. Life will be a lot easier going with a cluster.
I just wanted to add that we've been told at various conferences and venues that an open space development bylaw is being by right and conventional by special permit. is working in other communities, and I really want to keep up on the legal history of this. I think there may be more precedents than we know about right now, or there will be more precedents in the future that will support making a conventional subdivision a special permit, so we can discourage it more actively. So we'll see.
If you'd like to speak, please just step right on up. Just let's roll.
I'm not a lawyer, but if we cluster something and then have open space around it, how do we know that somebody is not going to build in that open space left 30 years from now? Like, if you spread things around conventionally, there's less spaces to stick additional houses in, as opposed to you have a small cluster and then 30 years from now you have another cluster on top of it and then another cluster, and all of a sudden you look like Newton. So is there some kind of legal protection against that happening?
The answer is yes. Short answer is yes. Permanent legal protection of that open space is built into the bylaw, and there's kind of long language in here with that, but thank you for asking. It's a good point.
Well, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I'm also in favor of this, and I think the planning board's done a fantastic job sort of trying to not make it too complex, but get enough in the language to make it encouraging for developers to do this. It's great for the environment. It's, great for a lot of reasons. My only question actually is, one group we really haven't talked a lot about is if buyers are going to want this. So being a Luddite myself, I think there may be people that they want 2 acres of land so that they can be separate, not have someone right next to them. I know some people, particularly maybe millennials, are used to living in Somerville, and they want people right next door to them, like Somerville. I don't know, but I kind of like having both of them be by right, so that the developer has a choice of what they think is going to sell. We're not going to really know what's going to sell. I would like to think that these units would be popular, and John's point about them increasing value because you're essentially living on next door to conservation land is cool. But there may be a lot of buyers that just, can do that in Somerville, and if they want to get away from people, they really want to get away from people. So I'd be curious to see what the market, and maybe other towns are further along than we are so that they can speak to this, but I'd be curious what the actual market is. And George, you work in this business, so you might have some insights also.
Yeah, I mean, this is, as you said, going to the conference that you got to, Marion, this is the trend that a lot of towns are going to. You can just drive to Medfield and see some of the cluster developments that they've done there, and they've been very successful. I think also anything by right is going to encourage a developer, because developers, one of the biggest challenges I would say with a developer with a subdivision is time and infrastructure. Because if you're doing a standard development, like you said, Steve, the miles of like a mile of road is one of the most cost prohibitive starts to any development. So if you can limit the amount of roads into the one section of the property, it's going to be very much will encourage a developer to go that route.
Just if I could add to that the towns that I represent have done it successfully. They have been popular. They do sell. There are people, let me put it a different way. Somerville is a hot market, and it's considered up and coming. And sometimes people like to have neighbors, particularly if they have kids. They want their kids to be able to have a friend. And living in a little bit of a community as opposed to being a hermit way off and separate. Some of us might like to be separate, but there is a market for people who like to have neighbors.
If I could, I'd like to go to the economics, and George, maybe you can weigh in, or maybe from your conference or other information you have. What will a cluster development tend to attract in terms of the size of the residences? Because we know that if they're 2-acre, 3-acre lots, we're going to get 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom houses, which is great if they sell for $1.5 million or more financially speaking, for the town. Or if they bring in like two-bedroom townhouses or something, those are also very likely to be financially good for the town. Do you have any?
Depends
color?
on the size of the units that you're building. I mean, a lot,
Well, and that's what I'm
sometimes
asking.
if it's a homeowners association that they're taking care of a lot of the maintenance, you're going to attract more empty nesters who want to stay because they don't want to take care of the 2-acre property anymore. But if it's a 4-bedroom house in a town like Sherburne with great schools, it's going to attract a family no matter what, so.
What are the sizes of the clusters, though, typically? I think that's what we've
Yeah.
been getting at. Are they townhouses, 3,000 square feet, or are they?
Will it preclude McMansions, for example, just because people don't want that? Well, I don't mean legally, but again, more economically.
Ben, you know, one thing it can do is, you don't have to have uniform lot sizes the way you're more apt to have in a standard subdivision. So you can actually create a real variety of houses. So you could have your, 6-bedroom mansion on one part of the property, and other parts of the property could have, smaller cottages type developments. It gives you a lot more flexibility.
They just have to be built in that 40% cluster of land.
Right, and in our town, we've got another limiting factor, which is we've got on-site septic and water, and so the total number of bedrooms for any parcel is going to be ultimately limited by that as much as zoning.
Right, where you can place those, okay.
Right, and the size of the lots will be very flexible, so you could do that. As we have it now, the size always has to be at least 1 acre, so it's really not a true cluster. There's Pine Hills down in the south, that's apparently, they're fairly large houses. They're clustered quite close together with a huge amount of open space, extremely successful. And there are smaller ones. I mean, you can find every size out there. And I think in our bylaws also, we're allowing duplexes as to be part of such a cluster, depending on, what the developer decides to do. Pardon me?
That requires a special permit, though, right? A duplex?
Would duplex require a special permit?
The version of the bylaw I have here says that duplexes and multifamily structures would be allowed by special permit.
Oh, there you go.
Unless that's been changed.
No, that hasn't.
Okay.
I just forgot.
Just a quick statement that the current subdivision bylaw has not been utilized in at least 20 years, according to Gino. So we are proposing something that may or may not be used in the near future. And if someone's going to build a subdivision in town, we'd hope that they would choose this option over another option. And there are a number of parcels in town that are large parcels, and this is still a far better option. This is the same number of houses on that land as a conventional subdivision. It's just preserving more open space and configuring it differently.
Actually, to that point, Marion can talk to this. The land acquisition has been looking at a parcel in town that would be, in my inexperienced opinion, perfect for this type of development.
I would actually, my gut instincts say, if on any example of a 20-acre lot, if they're going to cluster a bunch of homes, you end up with smaller, fewer bedrooms than if you spread out 10 homes with 2 acres a clip. And going back to the core math that the esteemed Mr. Williams put out a few years ago, we really need about $650K of taxable property value for every new school kid, right? And so, approximately, we up in that number, Ben?
I wish you had told me you were going to ask
Trust me, I read that report. And so, to me, the idea of clustering some houses, again, I'm not an expert, but you end up with fewer bedrooms and therefore fewer potential school-age children than if you were to take, 10 homes over 20 acres at 2 acres a clip. That's just my gut instinct. I'm not a builder, but that's what I think.
You're right. It's about, I estimated about 13,000 plus or minus of marginal cost for an additional student.
It's part of my mantra that I repeat when I go to bed every night. Anyone else up here? Any other further public comment? I'll kick it over to you guys.
I'll make a motion to recommend this article as presented.
And I'll second it. And under discussion, I would say, once upon a time, I was a member of the planning board. I know how much work goes into this. I know how much care and attention for a long article like this has gone into this. I think we should support our planning board and join in the comment that I think a few of you have made to commend the planning board for all of the efforts on this article and other articles. But a long article like this takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. I believe we should support them.
Yeah, I agree. I was on the planning board once, too. I took Paul's seat when he stepped off to become a selectman 20-something years ago, and was involved with drafting the initial bylaw. And I think we all wanted to have that bylaw in place, and the town supported it, but I think Gino kind of knew at the time it was going to be a tough sell to developers. This is a much better approach. I don't think the town was really ready for this until recently, but this will be good. All in favor of our endorsement? Okay, there we go.
Sorry.
Okay. So that's back up here. Any further debate? Last minute comments, questions, concerns? I'll take a motion for favorable action on Article 22.
So moved.
Can I get a second? Second. All those in favor? It's 7-0.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion to adjourn this Board of Selectmen?
Actually, can I say something first, Mike? So one concern I have is the 5 articles we reviewed tonight, first of all, we have to write it up, and second of all, the citizens have to decide at all town meetings. So one of the things I want to understand is all these sort of nuances and changes we've talked about. Now, I believe the warrant for town meeting will be the one you signed that doesn't reflect any of that, correct?
If they want to make changes, it'll be a motion on the floor.
So they'll have to make, I think we have to be very careful here at a couple of reasons. One is that we're going to have to make them in a way with slides or something where we specifically highlight the changes. Second, when we write these articles up, I think we have to understand, or at least explain in our write-up, what our favorable opinion was based on.
You're right. We actually voted wrong on all of these cases.
Correct.
Because now we have to explain for everyone why you want to vote against what advisory said so you can accomplish what advisory said.
Correct, and I think that's going to be, I've just procedurally, and I'm not an expert at this, I think making it difficult for the, just let me finish, Paul. Making it difficult for the citizens, we just need to go overboard to make it easier for them, I think.
Could I suggest that at town meeting, the motion be the correct motion, not a wrong motion that then has to be amended and then have advisory recommending against its own recommendation? No, the motion out of the box should be the correct motion incorporating the amendments, and there should be an explanation that the motion that advisory has made is somewhat different from what's in the warrant. Explain what those differences are, but the only vote at town meeting is either to adopt the advisory committee's affirmative motion or to defeat the advisory committee's motion. No second or third advisory commission.
So if I could ask the moderator to, the motions meeting will be in time for the planning board to have this congealed?
Yeah.
No,
if
we've made changes tonight,
the-
so, or you
actually-
made changes.
Actually, the clerk sent out an email message today to the people who are going to be involved in the motions meeting, and she suggested 3 days, the 10th, 11th, and 12th of April. So it will be important for advisory members writing up their write-ups for this to have the final language to make their recommendation, because it's going to be, we recommend favorable action because, and it needs to have the details so that people will see it, and also there should be written supplements provided for town meeting, so that when people see the warrant, they're going to understand that what they're voting on is what the planning board has amended. We've done that before in the past, where advisory has recommended favorable action on this article as amended by the planning board. But they need the actual language that gets amended, so.
But so will the language present, but the warrant is drafted, right? And
The
so-
warrant is drafted.
So how would we be able to get the citizens of the town to see the updated language? Or do we have to verbally call it out?
Well, no, you won't.
They'll print it up.
You'll have, it's going to be important for whoever to have written changes to hand out to people, and your motion will be, we recommend favorable action on the
updated.
amended article,
Okay.
or the article as amended by the planning board, and as described in the handout that you're going to receive.
Could I-
But you can also talk about it in your write-up.
Yes.
It's been changed in this way, and eventually, when you get to town meeting, you're going to get a
I
handout
think
saying
in
that.
your write-ups, as we've done in the past
Right.
from advisory,
Right.
in your report, in your recommendation, you'll say,
Yeah.
this is the amendment that was made to the
Right.
original warrant.
And when you're making your plea, your arguments for favorable action, you're going to talk about the things that are in the amended article.
So Brendan has, to my left here, was furiously typing away, taking the best notes possible, but I guarantee he didn't
What a
pick up on every
guy.
nuance.
No, I'm
of the
sure he
change.
didn't.
And we don't have, I
Right.
don't think any of us have that updated iteration that
No.
you guys have.
And so it's very important that the people who are sponsoring these articles and amended them get that information to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I had actually asked my team members here to get all the write-ups into me by tomorrow. And so that's going to be extremely hard. Can we get copies of those? Would you email the updated versions of
You were
those?
already emailed.
You can have mine.
Mine.
What's your drop dead date for Jeannie?
April 4.
We do it right now.
Okay, if you could email those to me, John, I will make sure everyone else has them. What's that? Thank you.
Were there any
Sure,
things
Ralph,
that were
good one.
changed tonight, though, in our discussion? I thought there was a couple nuances
Well, I
that
thought so
were
too.
considered being changed tonight that wouldn't be in what they currently have a paper copy of.
I think that's correct, from what I heard back there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would have to come.
We'd have to go with
Yes.
what they've
Well, Susan's making a good point. Then would planning have to meet again to revote that article?
Oh, you haven't, oh, okay,
We
right.
voted, we
Yeah.
voted on the recommendations that
Right.
were sent to the selectmen and apparently not to advisory.
Right, and there have been subsequent,
You modify,
yes.
like Paul said, for Sunday, to include Sundays of
Yeah.
long weekends for the entertainment one. If you're gonna make that modification, you guys have to meet again, vote again, then give them to us.
Yeah, so we could do it two ways. One is we could send what we sent already, and then make a motion to
Yeah,
make those
that'll be Monday,
additional changes
at least.
at town meeting.
Tuesday, maybe.
Or we can meet again, which will take 2 days. We have to post a meeting. Which meeting, what else? So we'd have to go.
You should probably go to the microphone.
John, it's you. I thought they were talking to me, because everything's about me.
Nobody can hear you, John.
So, sorry, so it seems like there's two ways. One is to just send you the copy that went to the selectmen, and apparently not you, I apologize.
Okay, which we just got now because Mike sent it, and I'll make sure we have it.
Yeah.
This is all kind of coming together late. But it's also exactly the same way every zoning town meeting has worked for the 20 years I've been involved in doing this. There's always changes.
Yeah.
There's always
Yeah.
floor amendments. I mean, this is, we're not off on a, frolic here. This
Yeah.
is just business as usual.
I don't know if that's good or not, but in any case, so we could simply, you have that one, or we'll send you an electronic version of it, and then make amendments on the floor. Or we can the planning board has to post a meeting and meet, which we could do on Thursday, and make these other amendments. There's not many.
John, can I suggest you not make amendments on the floor?
Yeah.
I've been to
Yeah.
1,216 town meetings. You go with a zoning article, particularly when that are long,
Yeah.
and you come up with amendments, you're going to lose your two-thirds. Somebody's going to say, well, if you've got amendments that you're going to make at the floor of town meeting, we suggest that you come back next year when you have
Yeah, yeah.
everything right. I'd suggest you make your amendments now, have your special meeting, finalize everything that you want to have in these things, and go to town meeting united. You'll have the Board of Selectmen,
That way, we can say,
advisory.
look, we voted 7-0 on this as amended,
Yeah,
right? And
Fine.
that's a better sell.
okay, so we'll send them to you Thursday.
Okay.
You can write them up.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to write them up based on the comments we heard here tonight
And clarified it.
and clarify it best we can.
Yeah, so,
Mine
wasn't changed.
Brendan has 20.
Constantly, you watch constantly.
Go to
You
YouTube.
had 21.
What do you think I do to put myself to sleep?
We may want to switch.
Okay, John, so if we can get your most latest, greatest, last-minute version changes for Thursday?
yep,
In the meantime, we all still have to do our write-ups based on what we heard here this evening, okay?
Well, actually, that's really
And
easy. 'cause
that
they
being
voted
said,
not to.
thank you guys very much. I know you guys put in a
Yeah.
heck of a lot of work.
again, thank you and both the selectmen and advisory for continuing your hearing and allowing us to do this, so. And we had a lot of great input from folks in town, so they did yeoman work as well, so thank you.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to, can I get a motion to adjourn this public hearing?
Can we
For real
adjourn?
this time, no more continuation, we're going to.
Can we adjourn the public part and talk logistics for a few minutes? or-
Absolutely, so
Yeah.
let's adjourn the public hearing.
And we can
Can I get
cause
a
the.
motion to adjourn the public hearing?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? That's 7-0. Public hearing is done. Give me a Judge Judy gavel.